Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to this virtual meeting of Newcastle City's full council, all members joining me today and everyone watching online. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We've had apologies from Councillors Petition, Holland, Margaret Wood and David Wood.
And I understand Margaret Wood has had an accident this afternoon and we wish her well. Does Council agree the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 3rd of February 2021?
Agreed.
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 Not seeing any dissent or seeing any in the chat? No? Okay, we move on to item 3, official announcements. Unfortunately, this year, Active Newcastle won't be able to host the colourful annual This Girl Can Newcastle International Women's Day event, but a virtual style event is being organised to celebrate the strength, resilience and achievements of North East women and girls getting active. Free virtual sessions will be held throughout the day on the This Girl Can Newcastle social media pages. So sign up on the Eventbrite website and you'll be emailed the information you need to access all the sessions, which will be on the 8th of March. Finally, as tonight's City Council meeting determines the council tax and budget, may I remind members that the guillotine will not be applied until 9 p.m. this evening rather than 8:30 p.m. One item of correspondence was received this month from our twin town of Nancy, and a further 2 items from the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for Education, both included in the supplemental agenda pack. Does Council agree to receive the correspondence?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Right, if we move on to agenda item 5, one petition to Council was received for this meeting, and I now call on Harvey McFarlane from Fight Racism, Fight Imperialism to present the petition.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, fine, thank you, Harvey.
I am Harvey, I'm from Stop the Cuts, Stop the Spin campaign. The Labour Council in Newcastle has drafted its budget from now until 2023, which will see another 40 million cut to our services. This will bring the total cut since 2010 to £345 million. This includes £400,000 to free school meals, £2 million to the public health budget, £13.2 million cut to services for the elderly, disabled and people with mental health conditions, £6.4 million cut to the children's services, including closing children's homes, £100,000 cut to libraries, and 15 council workers will be made redundant. We, the undersigned, demand that all Newcastle Labour councillors take a stand and vote against all cuts to services in the budget presented to them in 2021. In these unprecedented times, the council should be supporting their communities, not taking away from them. It's up to you, to all of us, to fight back against the cuts. And we've had 750 signatures for our petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. I now call on Cabinet Member Councillor McCarthy to respond.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Mr McFarlane for bringing that petition. I must say, Lord Mayor, it is bizarre that this petition is only targeted at Labour councillors and not at all members of council. Tonight's decision, as you have set out, is a really important one for all of us. So I'm really surprised that the issue isn't raised with members of our opposition, who of course shoulder some of the blame for funding cuts from central government over the last decade. I find it a very strange sectarian attack. Lord Mayor, as colleagues across the council chamber know, we have a legal responsibility to deliver a balanced budget. I think the people who signed this petition are putting forward to us that we break the law. As a party, Lord Mayor, and an administration, we've been at the forefront of fighting austerity over the last decade. We've not shied away from our commitments to take responsibility locally to protect services, especially for the most vulnerable people. And particularly, we've demonstrated that wholeheartedly across this city through the last year the time of this pandemic. Lord Mayor, we know it would be abdicating our responsibility if we were to walk away and leave those very difficult decisions to others who wouldn't have the same priority as this administration has had in terms of looking after those who are most in need. We're proud of our commitment to our workforce. Our partnership with the trade unions is really strong. We're managing this budget without any compulsory redundancies. We've tried to do that for several years now. We're managing it again. Our trade unions have always worked with us to fight the central government funding cuts, and we will, Lord Mayor, continue to do that. Our budget does prioritise young people. We've made a commitment that no child is left behind. We're protecting libraries through this budget that's in front of us this evening, and we're doing all we can to mitigate the rise in council tax, a regressive tax imposed on us as a precept in order to protect adult social care, Lord Mayor. We know, and I think I can speak for everyone in this council chamber, that that regressive tax has been imposed upon us, and we don't think that that council tax rise could be considered fair. We're having to impose it because we don't want to make significant cuts in that sector of our service provision. Lord Mayor, I'd like to suggest that the authors of the petition send this to government, who, as they set out, have cut over £300 million from us as a city since 2010. The people of Newcastle deserve better, and perhaps the petitioners can ask why our city has been hit harder than many areas of this country with the cuts that have been forced upon us. Lord Mayor, I'd like to propose that Council receive this petition. Thank you.
Does Council agree to receive the petition?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. No requests to address Council were received for this meeting, so we can move on forthwith to item 7, which is the main item of agenda, of course, which is the report from Cabinet Build Forward Better, the medium-term plan for 2021-22 and 22-22 and 2023. And I call on the Leader of Council, Councillor Forbes, to move the report, which is to be seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Before I formally introduce the budget, it's worth noting that it was exactly a year ago since we met physically in the chamber as a council. COVID has been a huge disruptor to every area and every aspect of our lives. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to every member of this council for the flexibility and maturity that you have shown in adapting to online meetings, finding new ways to engage residents and continue our usually relatively sensible policy debates. We were one of the first councils in the country to embrace online meetings. And whilst we may be missing meeting each other in person, or at least some of us are missing meeting each other in person, we should be collectively proud of how we've ensured democratic processes have continued in such challenging times. Lord Mayor, I'm not sure if you can see me. I seem to have a problem with my camera. But can you hear me okay?
Well, can't see you.
Can't see me, but can hear me. Well, that's probably as it should be. The disruption from COVID has been very apparent within the council's finances too. It's added an extra weight of uncertainty and risk into an already precarious set of circumstances. COVID has hit our city after 10 years of austerity. And despite promises from senior government ministers that they would do whatever it took to see us through, sadly, those promises have been broken. In the autumn, we had to introduce tight new controls on expenditure. And although there have been some compensations for our COVID-related losses and additional costs, there is still a net cost in the current financial year of £25 million. The defraying of the burden of losses from the council tax and business rate collection funds into the future mean that we are already projecting further losses in the next 3 years. And instead of giving us the stability of a multi-year funding agreement, which would have enabled us to plan ahead, we have only had a 1-year local government finance settlement with all of the associated uncertainty that a 1-year settlement creates. It's, Lord Mayor, astonishing that a government so early in its term of office and with such a large parliamentary majority is incapable of showing any leadership beyond their next press conference or media briefing. Lack of leadership from central government means that our local leadership is needed more here than ever to see our city through the tough times ahead. And I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about the sense of collective leadership based on a shared set of values that have been apparent across Newcastle through the COVID crisis. A sense of working together across organisational boundaries to get the job done, whether it's sharing PPE, coordinating food supplies, or giving consistent public health advice. A sense of looking out for and caring for those who need extra help to get by. A great example of this would be the City Lifeline, where Connected Voice and other voluntary sector organisations have proved to be invaluable partners. A sense of collective responsibility, with people making so many sacrifices to protect not only themselves and their families, but their neighbours and their communities too from COVID. And a magnificent collective effort to roll out the testing, tracing and vaccination programmes, building a new health protection infrastructure virtually from scratch. These values run through the budget that we're debating tonight. But it's important, Lord Mayor, not to forget the financial context. A decade of austerity with a cumulative loss to this council of £305 million. To put it in context, that's the equivalent of £2,270 for every household in this city that we've lost in terms of funding. A funding settlement, most recently, where 85% of the so-called resources available to councils comes from raising council tax and the adult social care precept to the max. And not for the first time, we've basically been instructed by the government to impose these rises on our residents. As a result, the proportion of our core spending power raised from council tax has risen from 34.7% to 44.2% in recent years. Demonstrable transfer of funding responsibility from central government grant to local council taxpayers. And despite having a greater proportion per population of both vulnerable adults and looked after children, since 2011, our core spending power has reduced by £504 per household, and Wokingham's has increased by £336 per household. It's an undeniable fact that austerity has hit councils like Newcastle much harder than many other Tory councils. Although we'll keep campaigning for a fair settlement, in the meantime, we must be clear about delivering on our priorities with limited resources. And I want Newcastle to be the best city to be born and raised in, to live and work in, and to grow old in. A great place to visit, a strong economy with opportunities for all for the future, and a shared sense of responsibility for each other and the planet. Over the last couple of years, we've been working hard with partners to develop our Collaborative Newcastle initiative. At a time when the government seems insistent on yet another major structural reorganisation of the NHS, which you may think is a strange priority in the middle of a pandemic, we've been quietly working on consolidating our approach to integrated health and care in the city. Based on strong principles of partnership and trust and underpinned by a legal agreement, Collaborative Newcastle is groundbreaking work to transform the health, well-being and wealth of people across our city and reduce social inequalities. At its heart is a vision of people as individuals around whom support is wrapped when they need it, rather than individual organisations providing different services that people have to navigate. In the coming year, we'll create an integrated health and well-being hub to support people to remain independent in their own homes as much as possible. Embed asset-based community development approaches to empower our communities, scale up social prescribing, and explore new ways of providing positive emotional and mental health support to people, rather than traditional services which just respond at times of crisis. This is a bold and visionary approach which sees older people as assets, not cost pressures, and explicitly commits our city and its partners to tackling inequalities which have become even more apparent and stark throughout COVID. And Ageing and Vitality presents economic opportunities too. Working with the National Innovation Centre for Ageing, we will scale up the potential for a new generation of goods, products and services to help people remain independent and healthy throughout their later years. Lord Mayor, this strong combination of internationally significant research, joined up local public services, a shared commitment to closing inequality gaps and a vision of how we create new economic opportunities is something I believe is unique to Newcastle. When I was first elected leader, almost 10 years ago now, someone said to me that the role was a poison chalice. The prospect of cuts year after year was daunting, but I've always refused to accept that Newcastle is a city in decline. Our role as a council is to lead us through the choppy waters ahead. And part of that role is unashamedly intervening in projects or programmes that promote our city or create wider investment opportunities. That's why we've taken a lead role in developing the Helix site, Stevenson Quarter, and now East Pilgrim Street, which have brought thousands of jobs to the city. And there's more to do in the year ahead, continuing to transform our city centre and local neighbourhoods to be more pedestrian friendly and improve air quality for everyone. But as we all know, and as we've debated many times, the biggest single challenge we face as a global community is climate change. Now, I'm not somebody who thinks that climate change will solely be addressed if we all just recycle a bit more, or fly a bit less on holiday, or plant some more trees. Yes, individuals have an important role to play, but I think our city's approach to climate change has to be embedded in every action that we take. That's why we've created the Net Zero Action Plan and have the Net Zero Action Partnership and the plan, and have already begun decisive action in a whole range of areas to reduce our carbon output. The plan will inevitably develop and change over time, but I firmly believe that the essential requirement of reducing emissions from our homes, our businesses and our transport system will act as a generator of new economic opportunities. And in the year ahead, as is set out in this budget, we need to move at speed to create these jobs, to mitigate the tidal wave of unemployment that will otherwise strike us. This budget contains plans and resources to engage young people and communities about tackling climate change, as well as purchasing thermal imaging cameras to identify where interventions are most urgently needed, looking into the feasibility of building low carbon heat networks similar to the ones at Helix, developing the Newcastle GIS-based renewable energy and energy efficiency network project, supporting energy audits for the community and voluntary sector, retrofitting public buildings, and helping the development of a new voluntary low carbon building standard. And we've already started work on our ambitious list of bids to government. I've not spotted any of them announced in the small print of today's budget, but I'm sure we'll be going through it with a fine-tooth comb to see whether there is anything for the north of Teesside. It was the last huge rise in unemployment in the 1980s and 1990s that prompted so many of my generation to feel that they had to move away in order to build a career. That's why, for me, the focus on job creation is so important. It gives people hope that Newcastle is a city on the up, a place that they want to be part of and proud of. COVID has increased an existing gap in educational attainment into a gaping chasm. I know that our schools have been doing an absolutely brilliant job throughout the last year. And with all this talk about schools reopening next week, it's easy to overlook that they have actually remained open right throughout the COVID pandemic for children of key workers and other children who need to be based in schools. And I know that our schools will continue to do an amazing job, despite the turmoil and uncertainty of the past 12 months. But there's an old saying, Lord Mayor, that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think it takes a city to raise a generation, particularly a generation whose life chances have already been damaged throughout the last year. So Newcastle, I'm saying to you, our city, we need to come together to make sure that no child is left behind as a result of the pandemic. We know that even before COVID, 2 out of 5 children in our city are living in poverty. We've seen the reversal of all of the progress made by the former Labour government. Childhood poverty blights people for life. The greatest service that we can do for future generations is to find new ways of ensuring that no child in this city grows up hungry or wanting or fearful or abused or neglected. That's why in this budget, we're allocating £200,000 to support the development of Children and Families Newcastle, which is planned to launch later this year. This new service will work with children and families to ensure they get earlier community-based support that tackles inequalities and supports all children to thrive. Yes, it's not quite sure start, but it's a damn good start. We're also allocating £300,000 to kickstart a citywide campaign to get support to the children and families who have been hardest hit by the pandemic. We need to ensure that all children and young people are able to catch up on their missed education, to take advantage of training and employment opportunities, and are not held back by emotional or mental health issues that have resulted from or being worsened by COVID. So we'll be asking partners, businesses and employers to think of financial and practical ways that they can help our city's children. This could be donating or funding IT equipment to support remote learning. It could be helping with arranging events or activities during the school holidays. It could be mentoring or careers advice or work shadow opportunities or guaranteed interviews for the COVID generation. I'm calling on everybody in our city to think, what can you do to help the next generation not just survive, but to thrive? So this budget, Lord Mayor, doesn't just set out 1 year's worth of council spending plans, although a number of my cabinet colleagues will say more about these during the debate. It set out a vision for how our city can come together to recover from COVID, to tackle the rooted inequalities that COVID has so cruelly highlighted, and lead our economy through structural change that builds on people's capacity for innovation and creativity, whilst showing moral and practical leadership to protect the planet. This budget, Lord Mayor, isn't just about building back better. It's about building forward fairer and building forward greener too. And I therefore commend it to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor McCarthy.
Lord Mayor, can I second the budget and reserve the right to speak later on in the debate, please?
Thank you. I now call on Councillor Ferguson to respond to the report and move amendments, which will be, I understand, seconded by Councillor Cott. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. This is my third year delivering this particular speech to Council. And given that, I thought I should take the time this week to revisit the speeches I've given previously. Given the year that we've had, a long and difficult year made more challenging by the government's terrible mishandling of the pandemic, I had thought that this year's speech would be very, very different. And in many ways it is, but in many crucial ways it isn't. Let me start with the context. Local government has faced a punishing financial year with increased costs and decreased income affecting almost every area of service, with impact likely feeding into the next municipal year. The Tory government's approach to supporting local authorities has been piecemeal at best and ignorant at worst. Households have suffered, livelihoods have been affected. Locally, officers have provided an exemplary response and should be commended. I'm sure I'll not be the only one this evening to offer thanks for everything that they have done locally to support residents through the pandemic. We're now out of Europe with all of the consequences that brings, and Boris Johnson's Tories are riding high in the polls with no prospect of meaningful change in Westminster anytime soon. Given that the administration has no hope of seeing a Labour government soon, will it change tack in its engagement with Westminster? Previous approaches appear to have been based on ratcheting up the rhetoric, but what concessions has that approach gained?
We've lost you, Councillor Ferguson. Have you muted yourself?
Can you hear me now, Lord Mayor? I think I might have. I'll start where I got to there. I'm pleased to see greater calls from Labour to reform local government finance, as I've consistently called for. Simply calling for more grant funding without accounting for where the money would come from isn't good enough. The system needs fundamental reform. Council tax is deeply regressive, the business rate system is not fit for the 21st century, and we need to have an honest national conversation about sustainable long-term adult social care funding that supports some of the most vulnerable in society. Local government needs longer-term certainty than a one-year settlement. But also, the oppositional approach needs to be overhauled. Already today, we've heard the North of Tyne Freeport bid has not been accepted, and Treasury North is going to Darlington. Our local and regional leadership need to make these cases, or we all lose out here and across the region. 10 years ago this month, we had the last Liberal Democrat budget for the city of Newcastle upon Tyne. And since then, the city has endured nearly 10 years of Labour. Where does that leave our city now and in the coming years? In my first speech in the council chamber, I asked where the council's performance indicators and organisational targets were. In my first budget speech, I challenged cabinet members to tell me what they felt their portfolio areas would look like in 3 or 5 or 10 years' time, and I received no clear answers. I have consistently called for a proper vision and strategy for the city, but there is none. This is true today as it has ever been, and the pandemic only exposes this. We've experienced 10 years of drift with no overarching narrative for how the city will develop. Of course, critics will claim that you can't plan for a one-off catastrophe for a global pandemic, but that is to miss entirely the point of having a vision and a strategy. It's not to predict the future perfectly, but to set a direction of travel, a roadmap, so that challenges like this can be faced on the basis of vision, values, priorities, and objectives. To not have these things is to allow yourself to be at the mercy of external events. To not have these things is to create finance-led policy making rather than policy-led financial planning. Councillor Forbes is absolutely right when he speaks to John Harris of The Guardian to say that local government needs 3 to 4 year financial plans from government, but that doesn't remove the need for the council to have a 3 to 5 year plan of its own. Countless organisations are affected by government decisions that they can't always anticipate, but manage to have a strategy anyway. Why don't we? Across my day job, my voluntary responsibilities, and my elected office, I see firsthand the challenges faced by the people of our city and our region. I got into local politics because I wanted to help residents, individuals, my local community. I fell in love with the North East when I moved here, and I want to see it thrive. I spend most of my time working on behalf of a broad spectrum of communities in the North East, many of them facing some of the most challenging circumstances anywhere in the country. COVID is a global, national, and local challenge, compounding inequalities and affecting individuals in our city. But I start where I feel I can help. So when I'm dealing with casework involving the living conditions in a resident's YHN managed home, or hearing that a pothole has destroyed a resident's rear tire 15 minutes after we happen to be talking on other issues, or providing support to a resident to explore what financial assistance is available to help with their bills, or helping residents to deal with crime and nuisance calls, or simply helping with a missed bin collection, I do feel compelled to speak up, to demand that the government delivers a fair deal for our city and our region, but also to challenge the narrative that this administration is faultless and that there is nothing it could do better or differently to deliver a good deal for the residents of Newcastle. In approaching this year's opposition amendments, it's important to recognise a few key factors. Firstly, that the Labour Group knows that standing orders prevent the opposition from presenting more than a set of narrowly defined and specific amendments to their budget and all the choices that they have made. Secondly, that for 3 years we have sought to demonstrate, and successfully in my view, that Labour's budget is a set of Labour's choices and that they can't claim to have been forced to do everything that they're choosing to do. Our amendments are costed, realistic, and affordable, showing that we are willing to make hard choices in the pursuit of reasonable policy objectives that can't be simply dismissed on trite terms as the administration may hope. And thirdly, that any amendments we make are confined to a narrow time frame, when ultimately the position we are in today is the product of 10 years of cumulative Labour choices that would take several years to unpick at a minimum. So we're stuck with outsourced leisure provision, a legacy of underinvestment in the fabric of the city, and costly legal battles on transport schemes, to name but a few. Significant increases to council tax year on year are a hallmark of this Labour administration. In previous years, the opposition has recognised that local authorities are increasingly dependent on council tax and business rates as sources of income. But this year is a special case, and therefore we have made a particular effort to show that an alternative is possible with our First Amendment. The Leader has claimed in statements to the media that our First Amendment would result in more cuts to vital social care services. I call on him to retract this desperate fabrication, or to clearly demonstrate where in our amendment that we add to the cuts already imposed by the Labour group, which part of the service will be reduced. In truth, this claim is intended to distract from the fact that the council was entitled to spread the introduction of the adult social care precept over 2 years, but the administration chose not to. The opposition will not take one single penny from adult social care to facilitate this amendment, and the Leader knows it. You didn't have to go for the full 5%, but you chose to. For the 3rd year running, I will take issue with the Great North City Fund. The Leader of Council claims that axing it will leave us a provincial backwater, which seems an odd statement to make. The fund has consistently underspent for the last 3 years, and beyond the Rugby League World Cup, already funded, which large-scale events in this coming year would be sensible to bring to a city only just recovering from a global pandemic? We make the balance up with a modest increase in parking charges for selected car parks in the city. I'm sure the administration would have dearly loved for the opposition to use non-ring-fenced reserves to achieve this saving, the easier to claim that this amendment isn't doable. But the opposition haven't made new use of reserves in our amendments since I've been proposing them. And this amendment merely repurposes existing planned use. Fiscally responsible alternatives are possible. Our amendments have not been branded unaffordable like the Tories' amendments were in North Tyneside last week. They are balanced and statutorily compliant. So I call on the Labour group to support this amendment or own their choices. Our second amendment recognises that residents are increasingly exasperated with the condition of the city's pavements and roads and desperate to see investment in sustainable transport. It seeks to reverse the swinging unnecessary cut to blue badge parking subsidies and does so in a way that we believe is consistent with the administration's stated aims to be net zero by 2030. There are no easy answers to reversing the decline of the city's crumbling infrastructure. Underinvestment by the administration has happened over years, and the government's financial support is only a partial solution. Some local authorities have identified scope within their capital programmes to invest in pavements and roads, and the opposition would explore those options if it was our choice. The opposition agrees with the move to sustainable transport, but ultimately, any option requires quality infrastructure to sustain it. I recognise that this amendment doesn't provide the whole answer to the problem, but it is at least part of one. Lord Mayor, it suits this administration's purpose to claim in the media that we have nothing to say on tackling poverty or addressing the educational attainment gap, but it only demonstrates that they haven't been listening and aren't paying attention. We have been saying for several years that the best route to tackling these societal challenges is in partnership with the community and voluntary sector. Local government's relationship with the education sector has fundamentally changed, but this administration still harks back to an old model of working. We care deeply about tackling the causes and consequences of poverty and want to see urgent steps taken to address the education gap and the crippling effects of digital exclusion. Where we differ with the administration is in not assuming that only the council can tackle these issues with a central top-down approach funded by one-off money. So our third amendment seeks to recognise that a council in constrained financial circumstances would be better working in partnership with the community and voluntary sector than to set aside pots of money with vague aims. The administration likes to allocate pots of money in the budget at the 11th hour, but the detail is often scant. I'm calling for more detail on this, or a recognition that our plan puts forward a reasonable mechanism by which to address the societal challenges that we all recognise. I'd originally hoped that this would be viewed as a friendly amendment, Lord Mayor, but pre-meeting comments to the media would suggest otherwise. And finally, our fourth amendment seeks to deliver a broad-based post-COVID economic recovery that supports not just the city centre, but also our local high streets and other small to medium businesses across the city. We need an economic recovery that spreads a revival to all. And as the Council brings forward proposals for better neighbourhoods, the opposition feels that this amendment is perfectly aligned with both ambitions. The COVID-19 Rescue Loans Fund had an appropriate purpose when it was first launched, but circumstances have changed. £2.4 million is available and could be extended on the basis of similar conditions to a wider range of organisations. This would have to take the form of loans with appropriate state aid considerations in place, but is a feasible mechanism by which to support a broad-based economic recovery for all. I'd like to return to my earlier theme on vision. I recently came across the previous Labour administration's vision for the city in 2020. No one could have anticipated the year that we've had, so it makes sense that such a long-term view seen now is inaccurate. But regardless of whether you agree with the particular direction of travel set out or not, you can agree that not having a direction of travel at all leaves any organisation vulnerable to being buffeted by external events. The current circumstances are exactly the time to articulate a new vision for the city. This is an ideal set of circumstances to do so. Newcastle needs a long-term view that accommodates the changing nature of the city centre and working patterns, the priority of addressing the climate emergency, and addresses the changing role of local government instead of trying to turn back the clock. It takes all of these themes together, not separately, and provides a cohesive narrative for where we feel the city is going to go in the future. A Lib Dem administration would provide that vision, working with residents to create a shared view of what Newcastle should look like in the future. We would start with a zero-based budget, taking a line-by-line review and building things up from the ground, working with residents to decide on priorities and taking those forward in genuine consultation and collaboration. We would change the way in which the council talks about cost pressures. The £345 million that Councillor Forbes quoted earlier is a combination of cuts from government and more recently inflationary pressures that the council defines for itself. Whenever these cost pressures were initially defined, they often referred to inflationary impacts, new statutory responsibilities and the like. But increasingly, they have referred to things like closing car parks, introducing neighbourhood response teams that had previously been cut, underperformance of the property portfolio and the like. We would be honest with residents about what the real financial pressures are for the council. They are there, we accept that, but we must be honest about where they're coming from, or residents have an unrealistic expectation about what can be achieved within reasonable financial limits. So here we are with a budget based on an amended Tory slogan, setting out no vision for the city beyond unquantified priority statements, with choices made by the Labour group that they will insist are forced. Surely we can do better than that. I formally move the opposition's amendments to this budget.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Cott? You're muted, Councillor Cott.
I second the motion and reserve the right to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd remind members that under Standing Order 17F Part 6, the budget proposals and the amendments will be the subject of a single debate, and then each amendment will be voted on in turn. Now, a number of members have already indicated they wish to speak, so I will take these speakers one at a time, and finally I will ask other members if they wish to add to that list. And finally, I will call on the two members who've reserved the right to speak. So first of all, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It has become a cliche, unfortunately, but these are unprecedented times. Pandemic has had a devastating impact on families, jobs, businesses and local services in our city. The council's finances are no different, and it is to the officers' credit that they've been able to effectively manage multiple changes required to budgets over the last 12 months. There will be long-term changes to the local economy and the council's ability to generate income. The high street slowdown has accelerated, demand for officers is uncertain, and the demands of the climate emergency have not disappeared. We must meet these challenges head on. The Liberal Democrat group today proposes enhanced support to local high street businesses with 2.4 million through a broadened scope of the COVID-19 rescue loans, enabling local businesses to survive and thrive. We propose a workplace parking levy that raises £1.4 million for the council and encourages the transition to sustainable commuting. And we also need a wholesale review of our office portfolio, which currently languishes behind high quality private providers, including a commitment to invest to upgrade. Liberal Democrats are committed to supporting businesses. This is critical to the financial health of the council by generating growth in business rates. This Labour administration has a sketchy record in this regard. Over the 5 years before the pandemic, the council's self-reported business rate income grew by 12%. And this would seem impressive, but ignores the 12% increase in CPI inflation, which business rates are pegged to. 5 years and no above inflation growth in business rates. And this is despite millions of pounds invested by the council into the city centre accelerated development zone, specifically for business rates growth, such as the Helix site, Stevenson and East Pilgrim Street. At the same time, local communities have seen little to no appreciable investment, resulting in dangerously cracked pavements, potholed roads, struggling high streets and privatised parks. The council cannot remain so blinkered, obsessively pouring money into the city centre for no net gain. We must invest in local communities and local businesses, supporting high streets as in our proposals, fixing pavements and maintaining accountability for our green spaces. Southend Council is showing what is possible, investing £50 million of capital money over the next 5 years to fix local infrastructure such as highways and pavements. A similar scheme for Newcastle would begin the reversal of over £100 million plus backlog in highway maintenance under this administration, but it is something Labour have refused to consider when I've raised it previously. We're seeing yet further evidence today of Labour's failure on investment. The government announcement of no Freeport on the Tyne is a slap in the face for the North East, showing once again that the Conservatives will only invest where they have seats. But the other reason that Tees Valley was successful is undoubtedly a functional, unified, combined authority covering the whole port. That opportunity for the North East was entirely squandered by Labour Party infighting. Of course, you can't have a Freeport when one side of the river can't agree with the other. Newcastle and the Port of Tyne are once again being left behind because of Conservative nepotism and Labour sectarianism. And despite Labour's black utterances, Liberal Democrats are not proposing a single penny extra from reserves that Labour haven't committed to themselves, and not a single penny is removed from adult social care funding with our proposals, just lower council tax for hard-working residents. The Liberal Democrats today propose a new direction based on the needs of local communities, sensible decision-making, and protecting the vulnerable whilst tackling climate change. I don't presume Labour will support our amendments. I'm surprised they even allow us such a dissension, but if they looked past national politics, they might actually see a better way forward for Newcastle. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to speak, obviously, in support of the budget as proposed by Councillor Forbes. This budget lays out our vision to build forward better for our city, and obviously I'd speak against the Lib Dem amendment, but in particular the Amendment 2, which refers to some transport changes and in particular the workplace parking levy. Workplace parking levy isn't a new idea. In fact, this was consulted on as part of our comprehensive package of measures to improve air quality in 2019. It's not the case that a workplace parking levy would be cost neutral in year one, as stated in the amendment. A significant amount of work would need to be done in developing the scheme, consulting with the public and not with the government, as is incorrectly stated in the amendment. And of course, there'd be a cost to implement the scheme. Where would the opposition suggest that we're going to get this money from? Where would they take it from? Which services would they cut to fund their workplace parking levy? As suggested, a surplus of 1.4 million in year two. The suggested 1.4 million in year two is less than 1% of the funding needed to bring our highways and footpaths to a decent standard. The total cost of the current backlog, which has already been referred to, is 184 million, which is the result of years of underinvestment by the Tory government. And I'm going to sense some eye rolling now. Yes, of course, started by the coalition government, of which the opposition party in this chamber were complicit. The amendment refers to cities where the workplace parking levy has been implemented. This should be singular, as to date only one city has introduced such a levy. Councillor Stone is always keen to cite Nottingham as the example of where a workplace parking levy is working, the only example. And not comparing like with like. Nottingham and Newcastle are very different cities. Reference is made to the fact that Nottingham invested in electric buses and that Newcastle could do the same. It fails to note that Nottingham owns 80% of the buses, unlike Newcastle, where the buses are owned by private companies. Plus, it's important to note that Nottingham didn't actually buy the buses with this funding. They use it as match funding for other funding bids. It's stated that any income from workplace parking levy would be used to prop up free parking. Any income from a workplace parking levy should surely be used to invest in infrastructure improvements. But I've mentioned parking, and in their amendment, it seems to suggest that the increase in a parking charges could contribute to adult social care, which is very confusing because this is unlawful, and Audit Committee were actually told this on Monday. All of this brings me to the conclusion that the alternative that Councillor Ferguson suggests, and all it suggests to me is that the opposition has little or no understanding of the issues relating to parking, transport, or indeed the funding of any other services that as a Labour Council we're proud to deliver to the residents of our great city. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is not a budget. I say it every year. This is not a budget. For the 10th year in a row, this Labour administration has failed to present Council with a proper budget book. Instead, we have had 10 years of lists of service amendments. We know why this is done. It's done to get a political message across. It's done to avoid proper scrutiny. But it is an insult to this Council and it is an insult to this city. Now, in 2012, I can recall Councillor Forbes saying he would not take a salami slicing approach to savings. But that's exactly what he's done for the last 10 years. If he actually presented a proper budget book, like we used to get, he'd be able to look beyond that salami slicing and take a more strategic approach to the city's finances, and we could debate a more strategic approach to the city's finances. But as usual, the spin comes first. Now, something else Councillor Forbes made a great big deal about early on in his reign was the Fairness Commission. Yet since then, we've seen council tax, which, as Councillor McCarthy rightly said earlier, is the most unfair of all the taxes we have. we've seen it rise at twice the rate of inflation under this Labour administration, walloping those on low incomes. We've also had a rent increase this year, which I will come back to. But so much for fairness. What's the point of the Fairness Commission if you tick a box and then move on to implement very unfair policies? Another early idea was cooperative councils. And it's very hard to see what that ever did. And certainly a lot of local residents groups that I deal with in Ousbourne Ward say they still do not get a fair hearing from the council. And the voluntary sector has complained that the percentage of the council's budget being delivered through the voluntary and third sector is going downwards. It's going in the wrong direction. More recently, the latest idea is the 15-minute neighbourhood, which is borrowed from Anne Hildago's Paris. But there's nothing in the budget to promote local services. And this seems to be a theme. When we debate it, it seems the administration seems to think it is purely about walking and cycling, which is part of it. But without local services, people have to travel further. So we need strong local neighbourhood services in order to deliver that policy. And in all those cases, there's been a big fanfare in the press, great words, Councillor Forbes out leading the charge, and then nothing changes, nothing at all. It is all hype, which begs the question, does this administration have a clue? Now, I read recently in the press, Councillor Forbes telling Cabinet that I had voted to support his rent hike on council tenants. This was big news to me because I don't get a vote in rents. And the reason why is somebody took control of rents away from YHN and back into the council. Who did that? Councillor Forbes. Which begs the question, did he deliberately mislead Cabinet, which would be a resignation matter, or does he simply not have a clue what he is doing, which isn't much better? He is still to publicly retract this statement, by the way. So what we've seen over the last 10 years is a long trail of empty rhetoric. And it's almost like the bit in Wizard of Oz where Toto the dog pulls back the curtain and there's a man sitting there pulling the levers that operate the smoke and mirrors. And that kind of, to my mind, that's the vision I have of this administration. Making a big fuss, plenty of noise and light, and then nothing happens. A decade of winging it. Now, what our amendments do, and we would like to have gone much further than this, but the whole way that the administration has set up the budget process recently makes it very difficult to go terribly far. But what these amendments seek to do is to put substance behind the surface of some of these policies which have been adopted and then pretty much abandoned by the administration. If members of the majority group really believe in fairness, they should vote to restrain unfair council tax. If they really believe in the cooperative council idea, they should vote to deliver COVID support through the third sector, where it would probably be more efficiently done because they have the processes and systems already there. They do not have to start from scratch. If they really believe in 15-minute neighbourhoods, they should vote to support neighbourhood businesses. And if they really believe in tackling climate change and air quality, they should vote for a workplace parking levy. If they really want to make a difference, they should support the amendments. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Avery.
Can you hear me, Lord Mayor?
Yes.
Right. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Members may note that I'm walking wounded still this evening, but I'm still thoroughly delighted to support this budget. The first thing I want to talk about today is the other budget that we've heard and are continuing to hear as this meeting continues, which is the one presented by Rishi Sunak. Councillor Forbes has already mentioned some important salient points, but one thing I want to note is that at the same time the government refuses to give us a multi-year funding settlement, they have continued to plan for what they believe will be a significant and ahead of inflation growth in council tax, which suggests, because I'll read out the figures for you, which were helpfully supplied to me by my friend Paul in Stockton, that they're predicting that council tax will rise from 39 billion this year to over 14.5 billion by 25-26. So they've already told us that they're continuing to have a council tax driven set of funding, that they have no intention of changing it. They have no intention realistically of changing social care funding. They just don't want to announce a multi-year budget because they think they might be attacked for it. But they've already let the game away by telling us that they think council taxes are going to go up ahead of inflation, i.e. they are going to require us to raise it every year ahead of inflation, and they have no intention of providing a better and alternative funding system. I'd also note that today was a massive missed opportunity. We have an unemployment crisis already, and it will only get worse. Today, the government could have chosen to unleash councils and their spending power by supporting us directly in a meaningful way, by supporting us in social care to enhance wages and increase the number of people working in the adult social care sector. It could have supported us in green jobs and in things like the pothole backlog to generate jobs on the ground and put people back into the economy and put money into the economy. And they've chosen not to do that. And in particular, I'd note that we're now closing in on 500 days since Boris Johnson said that he would solve social care with a real funding plan within 100 days. We don't have it. I accept that he's had COVID, but he could at least have done it in 300 days. He's about to take 500 and we still have no plan. So what else do I want to talk about? So I'd note that this year's Liberal Democrat amendments are at least less facile than some of the previous years. And at least, and this is very important, they have proposed amendments. The so-called independents have not proposed any amendments to the budget. They're going to go to the electorate this year and tell us that they would do things differently, but they have proposed no amendments. They have nothing substantive to say about how your council tax is spent, how your services are run, what your city should look like in the future. They have no vision, they have no ambition, and they're not putting anything forward. It's very easy to snipe from the sidelines and complain about everything. They have no alternative vision. And then I just want to briefly discuss the workplace parking levy, because they said that there are no easy answers, but they keep returning to the workplace parking levy. As Councillor Ainsley said, no other council in the country other than Nottingham does it. Why are Nottingham differently situated? They run their own buses. They have a tram system that they have a majority stakeholding in. They are reasonably insulated from other council areas. There's a significant gap between them and Mansfield, between them and Derby. We are differently situated. We have a continuous urban area across 5 authorities. Therefore, anything like a workplace parking levy would require action across those 5 authorities. None of the other 4 have moved forward on a workplace parking levy. Something that the Liberal Democrats insist is so obvious and common sense that it's not going to cost anything to implement it, which seems unlikely to me. Why is it then that the other 4 authorities, if this is such a great idea, why is nobody else moving forward either? Why isn't Northumberland, which isn't run by the Labour administration? Why are other Liberal Democrat-run councils elsewhere in the country, why haven't they implemented workplace parking levies? And I'll allow them to answer that question themselves later in the debate. So just a very few things. So we've heard from every single speaker that there was no long-term vision. I mean, which is just on the face of it wrong. But they've said that we needed strategic investments, and Councillor Hall said in particular that we needed strategic investments in upgrading our office infrastructure. What have we been proposing, which we have now delivered? A strategic long-term upgrading of the Civic Centre and its office infrastructure in order to generate income. That was a long-term strategic decision that Liberal Democrat councillors oppose, and at no point have they said tonight how they would spend the money that they would prefer not to have generated by not upgrading the Civic Centre. That was a long-term strategic vision that we committed to deliver on our priorities. The Liberal Democrats opposed it.
Can you wind up, please, Councillor Avery?
Yeah. So what's our choice tonight? So from Labour, we have reasonable, well thought out proposals. From the Independents, we have nothing. From the Liberal Democrats, we have a return to easy answers. I'm very proud to, and a refusal to ignore, a refusal to admit the mistakes that they've made in the past, that would, if we had listened to them, have made us worse off. I'm very proud to support this budget and to reject the amendments. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm sure we all accept that the last 12 months has been incredibly difficult for the council and that staff have worked extremely hard to keep services running whilst dealing with the effects of a pandemic that has been immeasurably worse than anyone could have predicted. As opposition spokesperson on health and social care, I'd particularly like to put on record our thanks to all the public health and social care staff who have done an amazing job to try and keep the citizens of Newcastle safe. We also recognise the Tory government's utter failure year after year to provide local councils with the funding necessary to improve the health of our citizens and to care fully for those children and adults who need our support. In particular, it is an utter disgrace that councils are yet again being forced to raise council tax just to cope with the government's inability to sort out a fair and sustainable way to fund adult social care. But the large increase in council tax this year will be particularly hard for many people whose finances have been hit by the pandemic. Our amendment calls for the rephasing of the introduction of the adult social care precept, implementing 2.5% this year and the remaining 0.5% next year, saving a small but significant amount from household budgets across the city in the coming year. I'm not sure if Councillor Forbes has accidentally or deliberately misunderstood this amendment, but I can assure all Labour councillors that the savings we have identified to implement the change would allow a small reduction in council tax bills for those hard-pressed residents without in any way affecting the money available for social care. Lord Mayor, year after year, we've heard Councillor Forbes claiming that the council would go over a precipice without more money. But in fact, by finding new ways of working, that hasn't happened. For example, we very much welcome the new ways of working in adult social care over the last few years that have led to savings without serious damage to services. In fact, many of the changes have led to better services, such as the moves towards intermediate care and more extra care housing. And the proposals in this year's budget to modernise the way we care for adults with learning disabilities will, I'm sure, improve their quality of life. However, as I said last year, I am concerned by the proposal to remove the automatic £5 per week income disregard for disability-related expenditure when calculating a service user's contributions towards the cost of community-based services. When looked at together with the charges for parking for blue badge holders, which we strongly oppose, this does seem to be an unfair attack on disabled residents. On public health, we understand the move away from individual funding towards more population-based measures, but there was very poor communication with some voluntary groups who carry out this work for the council and who feared that they would have severe funding problems as a result of this change. I understand that discussions are now taking place to allay those concerns, but this was poorly managed. We rely so much on the excellent work done by the charities and voluntary and community groups in our city, and we are disappointed that funding for the voluntary groups is decreasing, which is why one of our amendments would provide additional finance for the voluntary sector to be used supporting children and families to overcome the challenges of the pandemic and to help tackle food poverty. As I've said many times over the last few years, I'm also disappointed about the very slow progress made by Council on shared services, which has the potential to save a huge amount of money. At last, we have seen great progress on the integration of health and social care, something we've been calling for years, and that's already saving a lot of money by stopping duplication of services. We need this to go further. As a ward councillor, I'm very concerned that the direction of travel of the Labour Council continues to lead to deterioration in the state of our local neighbourhoods. There is more litter, more dog dirt, less grounds maintenance, and a total refusal to maintain trees. Residents are actually being told that if a tree on the public highway is blocking their light or overhanging their house, they can pay to have it pruned. I'm sorry, that's totally unacceptable. And what about our roads and pavements? This week is Pothole Watch Week, when cycling groups are calling attention to the sorry state of many of our streets and the risk that potholes can cause to cyclists. Labour councillors say they want to encourage more people to cycle, but there's not much incentive when so many of our residential streets are in such a shocking state. I had a walk round my ward last weekend and was frankly horrified. I've been asking for streets to be resurfaced rather than just filling in potholes, but this request is ignored. So what happens is that the repaired potholes break down within a few months and have to be done again. This is an appalling waste of money. So tonight I'm asking the council to stop wasting money to do what other councils have done to deal with the massive backlog of road repairs, and that is to make a proper capital investment. Southend Council, has been mentioned, has proposed a £50 million investment in roads and pavements over the next 5 years as part of the council's capital investment programme. In 2014, Stockport Council agreed a capital investment of over £100 million over 9 years, which has led to a massive improvement in the highways condition. And Kent Council uses microsurfacing to help preserve the life of road surfaces and ultimately reduce costs, and they've invested £7 million so far. If other councils can do this, why cannot not Newcastle? And it's certainly a top priority for residents. We are proposing a small amount of extra funding for roads and pavements this year, but it is a drop in the ocean, I understand that. So I do urge Labour councillors to look at a long-term solution. Lord Mayor, our amendments tonight would reduce the rise in council tax, reverse the unfair imposition of parking charges for disabled people, provide more funding for road and pavement repairs and sustainable transport, increase funding for the voluntary sector to tackle food poverty and support families and children, and increase support for local businesses. I urge colleagues to support them.
Thank you. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Trying to stop that bulb. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Not setting aside the pandemic and the current COVID climate, I'm happy to be contributing tonight to what is an extremely well-balanced budget that complies with our legal requirements governing this council. The budget is despite and in light of the government's financial package calculated disproportionately to this council and wrapped in austerity, with increased cuts resulting in increased deprivation, increased inequality and increased poverty. However, having said that, I am glad we've still been able to protect some vital services, and in my portfolio areas, for example, our libraries, and we've been able to set aside £1 million towards the consideration of a new pool in the west of the city. Turning to the amendments being proposed by the opposition tonight, Lord Mayor, and in particular Amendment 3, we are already supporting our children and families and tackling food poverty through our fantastic COVID response services, including through City Lifeline and our single point of contact service and our localised testing and exemplary vaccination programme and our COVID response BAME steering committee and our BAME community champions, and the list goes on. I delivered a full and comprehensive report last month detailing all of that support and much more. Lord Mayor, I cannot believe that Councillor Ferguson claims to see no vision and strategy in our priorities and in this, our budget, and that Councillor Kane sees the leader of this administration as having no clue. Despite years of horrendous cuts and challenging cost pressures, this budget will help us plough through protecting people, protecting services. Let's not forget, Lord Mayor, that it was our vision and strategy that took this council back from the opposition over a decade ago, and it is our vision and strategy that will continue to diminish them to the point in which we are left in this chamber talking to ourselves. This well-costed, legally balanced budget will allow us to continue working hard to build forward better, and I support it wholeheartedly. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ashby.
Yes, sorry, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much indeed. Good evening. I add my support to the Liberal Democrats Amendment number 4, and in particular for the need to do all that can be done for small and medium enterprises. I shall return to these SMEs in a moment, but first I want to raise 3 issues in respect of business rates that affect all businesses with premises, whatever their size. I'm concerned to learn that there's a 500,000 rating appeals national backlog, once to the tune of a total rateable value of 174 million are in the queue from Newcastle. And we have a contingent liability in respect of them of nearly £8 million if they succeed, because the council has collected the money already based on the 2010 ratings list. The importance of this is that if the appeals fail, that £8 million is available to the council to spend. If they succeed, it goes back to support local businesses in these hard times. So we have a keen interest in speedy resolution, but the appeals procedure is sclerotic. Determining the appeals is not the responsibility of the City Council. That lies with the Valuation Office Agency, whose local branch used to be in Gosforth, but no longer. Is this symptomatic of government cutbacks and inadequate funding of the tools to do the job that the government has placed upon us? In my view, the Council should be making representations to the City's MPs and to the Treasury to sort out this administrative mess in short order. The second point I want to make about business rates is what a rotten system they are. The Liberal Democrats have been pushing for many years for their abolition and replacement by a site value tax system. As I previously told Council, in Newcastle, this would reduce this particular tax burden by over 10%. And third is about the consultation with businesses on the budget. There's a task and finish group looking into budget consultation, but in a recent conversation with Asian Business Connections, I was told they'd not been consulted. I'm sure that's something the task and finish group will want to look at. No taxation without meaningful consultation won't start a revolution, but might make for better local government. Returning to SMEs, we should remember that these are at the heart of our local economy. And as national and international chains are closing down and chopping jobs, while some are shipping their profits offshore to avoid tax, and others are being suffocated by the Tories' Brexit red tape, we should be doing all that we can to help small businesses now in the pandemic and to grow for the future. SMEs are owned and managed by local people. They have roots in the community. They have skin in the game. Far too often, they have to put their homes on the line to get bank finance. Many have reinvested their business rates grant to improve their businesses when normality returns. Today's budget announcements of help for the sector is predicated on businesses making profits and having the cash reserves to invest quickly. That's not what many will be in a position to do anytime soon. The big things are for government to do, but there's plenty the council can do. And the North of Tyne Combined Authority has to show that an elected mayor can deliver real benefits by overclaiming less and doing more. It needs to be learning lessons about its purpose and effectiveness from the government announcement today of innovative investments in Leeds, Darlington and Teesside. Not here. It's time to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. The COVID-19 Rescues Loan Funds was a reasonable response to the financial challenges posed to a number of organisations in the city at the time it was announced. However, subsequent government support has reduced the need for this funding, as demonstrated by the low take-up of available funds. As we all know, SMEs, particularly those on our local high streets, continue to struggle as lockdown goes on. The council should support an economic recovery across our whole city, not just the city centre, important as SME traders and artisans are in places like Granger Market, by enabling SMEs to invest to support recovery, jobs and a better future. Our amendment number 4 shows that the Liberal Democrats have ambitions for small businesses, which are the heart of our local communities and which can set us on the road towards a strong and green economy of the future. Lord Mayor, we invite Council to share our ambitions.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've listened with great interest to the debate so far tonight, and I've had time to digest the proposals put forward in the alternative budget, and I've come to the following conclusion. We have a choice of an alternative budget as an attempt to drag this city down and to lose the opportunities being made available to our residents of this great city. Or we support the main budget proposal, a budget that offers hope, opportunity and stability even in these difficult times. We all must acknowledge that the budget process has been difficult and we're in challenging times. And I will put my vote of thanks to all of the staff that's been involved, not just in preparing the budget, but getting us through this really, really challenging time. However, We have put forward proposals that we are confident in, and we will continue to review regularly for any further impact COVID within our portfolio areas. Within my portfolio area, the proposals have been developed across a number of themes. Efficiency. We are continually reviewing the ways we deliver services to ensure that they respond to the changing environment and operate as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Sustainable assets. Keeping our property and land portfolio fit for purpose and flexible to respond to the changing demands and the requirements is vital. Continuing review of our assets enable us to maximise return and future-proof the portfolio. And building on our previous year's savings, the office accommodation project continues to provide a significant revenue return on the recent capital investment. Lord Mayor, we've heard quite a bit about the proposed amendments tonight, and in particular, there's been particular attention paid to Amendment 4, and I'd like to cover that myself. It's entitled COVID-19 Rescue Loans Fund. In answering this, I'm assuming that this refers to the Additional Restrictions Grant, or ARG, and not any loans fund. The council do not operate any COVID loan schemes. The Bounce Back Loan Scheme is administered through many of the main retail banks. But do we support businesses? Do we support small and medium enterprises? We support all businesses, whether in the city centre or across the city. We have targeted our use of ARG resources as follows: to support businesses not registered for business rates, who otherwise would not meet the eligibility requirements for one of the other grant funds; to support businesses who have not been legally required to close, but operate in the supply chain of the leisure, hospitality, or accommodation sectors, and so have been impacted severely; to support businesses who have been required to close with the fixed premises costs that do not meet the tight definition set by government, such as market traders; to support taxi drivers with a one-off small payment to reflect their additional costs; and also, Lord Mayor, to provide a one-off grant to businesses not required to close with fixed premises costs who have seen significant fall in trade. As of today, we have awarded £5.3 million of our £8.7 ARG allocation. Our modelling predicts that by mid-April, that money will all have been allocated, 100%. So, Lord Mayor, to try to put forward figures that there's money available isn't correct. It is in the process of being handed out to those who most need it. And, of course, what we want to do is spread that as best as we can and as fairly as we can. In summary, we feel that we have targeted the limited ARG resources available to us appropriately and regret that we cannot support every business in need. We recognise these issues raised by businesses, and we have not been able to access government support. And we will continue to call on government to address these issues in their support packages. So the amendment, Lord Mayor, is technically wrong, and I would ask for it to be withdrawn. Resilience has been built into our proposals with the reliance on achieving them by doing things better rather than reducing staff resources. Maintaining the directorate's knowledge base and expertise will be critical in helping to lead the city out of the pandemic and securing the economic recovery of our city for the benefits of all its residents, businesses and visitors to our great city. Lord Mayor, I support the budget as proposed, unamended. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Morrissey.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Before I begin my speech, I'd like to record my thanks as Shadow Cabinet Member for Children, Education and Skills to all staff working within children's services and education for the extremely hard work they have done throughout an exceptional year. I wish to talk to Amendment 3 and show how the Lib Dems would be better positioned to tackle inequalities. And I'd like to point out to Councillors Ainsley and Bell, if our amendments weren't achievable, the S151 officer wouldn't have allowed them. This can be achieved by not using reserves, but by a relocation on the underspend from the Great North City Fund, otherwise known as the Fireworks Fund, which has ballooned under the current administration and can improve the status of Newcastle as a city where all residents really do matter and no child or family is left behind. Far from making us into a provincial backwater, as has been said by Councillor Forbes, using this as yet unspent and unallocated budget to improve the lives of some of the most deprived children and families in Newcastle will future-proof the city at a time where great change is happening. Supporting our young people to successfully complete their education and training, be ready to take on opportunities for businesses and enterprise, and to contribute to the Newcastle economy will provide lasting benefits to both themselves and the residents of this great North City. During the past year, food poverty has unfortunately become a term we've become very familiar with. A brief definition of food poverty is the inability to afford or to have access to food to make up a healthy diet, where a higher percentage of income is spent on food and where there is less choice from a restricted range of foods due to lack of income. Nevertheless, the pandemic alone can't be blamed for the huge rise in households who now fall into food poverty. Many families were struggling to manage before the COVID crisis and were already relying on food banks. Furthermore, the phrase food poverty doesn't begin to cover the extent to which some families are affected. If they can't afford food, they can't buy clothes, pay bills, and are far from having access to the electronic equipment children and young people have been relying on to help with online learning during lockdown. Research over many years has produced data suggesting that with good nutrition, children and young people are better able to learn, have fewer absences from school, improved concentration, improved behaviour, and better educational outcomes. At a time when our children and young people have been out of school for almost a year, the repercussions of these months of lost learning are devastating and will be felt for a lifetime, especially by those from low-income backgrounds, unless we are prepared to do something that we are well able to do. If the will was there to admit there is an alternative budget, and if the will was there, we could spend money on our children and young people now to ensure they are in the best possible position to make educational progress and not keep funds hidden away to indulge egos on vanity projects. Thinking about how this administration spends money leads me to my next point, which is the need for the voluntary sector to be given a greater role in how services are designed and delivered to disadvantaged families. This is not an area where the current administration should have a monopoly. Connected Voice has a long-established role in engaging and empowering communities in Newcastle. I believe over 90 years' experience of building social capital. Through its direct links to service users and history of acting as an advocate for them, this overarching organisation can help both design and deliver appropriate services for our hard-to-reach families. Another familiar phrase, borrowed from the voluntary sector, alludes to them giving better bang for your buck, which I'm sure no one will argue against. The voluntary sector in Newcastle is particularly well placed to respond to the post-pandemic changes we will all face, particularly those families experiencing social and income inequalities. There is the potential to build bridges, unite people, and reach out to those still struggling, and the voluntary sector can often be best placed to provide targeted local support. With their long-standing reputation, this organisation is well placed to support the reduction of food poverty and signpost children, young people and families to locality-based venues, which will also support educational catch-up. My final point links with the appalling increase in council tax, which must be one of the most punitive and regressive taxes ever. Low-income families on benefits can lose up to $370 a week from income support, job seekers allowance or pension credits, and 5% of the standard allowance can be deducted from universal credit to pay council tax. This administration has made the choice to implement the full rise immediately. even after accounting for council tax support, which some families can access. The poorest tenth of the population pay 8% of their income in council tax, while the next 50% pay 4 to 5%, and the richest 40% pay only 2 to 3%.
Morrissey.
Newcastle is a city of sanctuary, holding its arms open to people fleeing violence and providing a safe place to be. Let's be radical and use the unspent monies within the Great North City Fund, not reserves, to make Newcastle a place where residents are free from not only violence, but food poverty, educational disadvantage and income security. Come on, be bold, Mr. Forbes. Forget the fireworks and feed families. I urge councillors to support this amendment. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Ferguson is asking under Standing Order 23 to correct a misrepresentation of his speech. Very briefly, Councillor, I'll allow it. It must relate to something you said, but please be brief about it.
Certainly, Lord Mayor. I made reference to £2.4 million that would be available for our fourth amendment. Councillor Bell has contended that no money is available. I am specifically referring to money that comes from the COVID-19 Rescue Loans Fund that was signed off by delegated decision in July 2020 and which has been widely reported in the press. There have been commitments given through that fund, which totals £5 million to the Stevenson Quarter Hotel and I believe to Greenwich Leisure Limited as well. So I want to be absolutely clear because I was asked to withdraw that particular amendment, but the basis on which Councillor Bell is referring to it, I think is inaccurate. We are talking about a COVID-19 Rescue Loans Fund which does exist.
Thank you. If we can move on to Councillor Postlethwaite.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm speaking in support of the budget as moved by Councillor Forbes, and I reject the amendments put forward by the opposition. I want to speak tonight in praise of this budget and our council, the Labour leadership and all the staff who work here. But many of the budget savings that were planned to be delivered in 2020-2021 have been delivered in this most difficult of years, is, as Tony Kirkham says in his report, a tribute to the incredible hard work of staff at this council. Staff who have not stopped working and who have often taken on different or additional roles during this crisis. This is, of course, not a budget that we as a Labour administration would want to have to set. In the Labour Party, we believe in the proper funding of public services and local government. That the government will not fund adult social care adequately is a scandal. The government's instruction that necessary funding for adult social care should be raised through a higher council tax precept is a bad decision on its part. I have read and heard tonight that the Lib Dem opposition agree with us that adult social care should not be increasingly funded through council tax. However, Liberal Democrat Councillor Ferguson also said online that council tax is not a fair tax because it results in tax rises for everyone, regardless of the extent to which they use council services. I reject that argument. In Labour, we would not expect only those who directly use a particular service to pay for it. We are all connected and we should all contribute to the extent that we're able to the health of our society. What is wrong and unfair about raising money for adult social care through council tax is that councils that could raise a lot of money in council tax based on having a high number of high band properties are often not the councils with the greatest demand for adult social care. People in need of adult social care should be able to receive it wherever they live. Adult social care should be funded by national government in the form of a grant to local councils based on their local need. The government and the Lib Dems both continue not to understand the importance of funding public services. Though we have been let down again by national government, who have broken their promise of funding local authorities to do whatever it takes to protect the public during the pandemic, our council is still in a comparatively safe financial position compared to other councils, and for this we have our Labour group and council officers to thank. In recent years, the Lib Dems have put forward budget amendments that have been financially irresponsible and short-sighted. For example, in the 2017-18 budget, the Lib Dems proposed taking money from the council's Financial Risk and Resilience Reserve to avoid a cut to the spending on parks. If our council had been run by the Newcastle Lib Dems, we would have been in a much weaker financial position when the pandemic hit. Thankfully, we have low but adequate reserves and are in a good position to continue to deliver on our political priorities. This budget shows how serious we are as a council to help our city recover from the coronavirus pandemic. We will build a strong, sustainable and inclusive local economy. We will continue to protect the most disadvantaged and vulnerable in our city. Our net zero action plan will transform our city. Though our council continues to be shamefully underfunded by government, the local ambition of this council for our city and all the people who live, work and study here shines through in this budget. I'm proud to support the budget unamended. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Huddart.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I'd like, if possible, to make a few observations here. And like others, I'd like to thank the staff and the voluntary sector who, at the start of this pandemic, pulled out all the stops to help fund accommodation, well, find accommodation for some of our most vulnerable people and needy people, homeless individuals and families. And they gave an excellent service, which has quite rightly been noted at national level. The one thing I wanted to start with was that we all share concerns at the government's continuing proposals to push everyone into home ownership. Now, this actually denies the reality that we have so many families and individuals who are financially strapped and in need of good social housing, that they cannot afford to participate in things like Help to Buy and Housing First, etc. All they want is decent rentable housing. We also share concerns mentioned by the voluntary sector in their response to the budget consultation about the need for more funds for housing which is suitable for those people with a physical or a mental disability, along with our increasing elderly population. The £2 million which was moved from housing reserves could have funded several projects to support greater independence and tackle inequalities, particularly housing inequalities, for these aforementioned groups. However, this money has now been allocated to things like net zero and trees and leisure and food poverty, which are all very worthy projects, which were also, as they say, in search of funding. Fortunately, the cavalry's on its way after a stupidly long wait in the form of brownfield site funding. Huzzah, as they say in Russia. Hopefully, this funding, the allocation for which we haven't had yet, but will get going very soon, and will kickstart some housing projects on some brownfield sites. And this will enable us to look for match funding or funding for other projects that will help us develop housing for people with special needs, and also for the other residents that we have who are also waiting for decent social housing and certainly can't afford the private rented sector. So all I wanted to say, Lord Mayor, is I was sorry that the £2 million was moved from housing revenue account from their little store, but I am glad it's going to some decent projects. But I do think our residents, given what's happened to most of them financially during this lockdown period, how many more people we've got on things like universal credit, we are going to see a massive surge in the demand for decent social housing. And many more of the housing organisations are changing to become for profit as opposed to not for profit. And that is something which has happened in the past year or two, because they realise now that they can make a lot more money from providing affordable or social housing, and it is a concern. And that's all that I wanted to say, Lord Mayor. So thank you.
Thank you. If we can move on to Councillor Penny Evans.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, after years of Tory austerity, we've come to expect government cuts to council funding. But I am sure, in fact, I've heard this evening from many other speakers, that I'm not the only one who's totally shocked and outraged at this Tory government's broken promises of support for the residents of our city, other cities and towns across the country. More fool us that we believed and trusted that people would have integrity and tell the truth in the middle of a deadly pandemic. So when the Tories said that they would stand with local councils at this difficult time and would do whatever was necessary to support the efforts of councils, in fact, it was just a bunch of lies, which has left this council facing over 25 million of financial pressures as a result of COVID-19. There are many councils who trusted the government's broken promises and are in far worse positions, some facing massive job losses and others facing bankruptcy. So much for supporting our key workers. However, as Councillor Postlethwaite has said, in fact, I'm sure if we'd listened to this opposition's amendments in the past years of budget meetings, we would have been in a much worse position than we are today. So instead of giving councils the funds they need to keep our residents safe, this Tory government has passed the buck by giving councils no choice but to put up council tax. It's pushed the burden of the COVID costs onto residents across the country. And let's be under no illusion, as Councillor Avery said, the decisions to raise council tax was made in Westminster months ago, a way to spin and pass blame of tax rises onto local councils. Not only is council tax unfair and regressive, which we all seem to agree this evening, but it also raises more funds in Tory shires than in the northern cities. So yet again, this administration has had to step up and develop a budget in the difficult circumstances. A budget that tackles the gap in funding but ensures we continue to support our residents through and beyond COVID. A budget that puts green recovery at the heart of it. A budget that commits to tackling inequality, help address food poverty and pushes forward with our ambitious climate change initiatives through our net zero action plan. A plan that was created in cooperation with our residents, our volunteer sector, our businesses, trade unions, universities, hospital trusts, colleges, all of us working together to push forward with our ambition. This budget helps us to keep moving forward with our vision of a net zero city, of a clean and green city, safe city for the future. It allows us to support our tree planting and tree maintenance. And it will help us to decarbonise our economy and create a whole new generation of green industry jobs. It will enable us to continue to respond to the global climate emergency. Lord Mayor, I fail to see any amendments by the opposition in relation to our world-leading net zero action plan, so I'm taking it that it's a thumbs up from them on our plan. It is a shame that the Chancellor has failed to deliver for our region in his budget, but I am hopeful that the bids that we have already submitted are successful and will help us on our journey to being net zero. Lord Mayor, I support this budget and I reject the opposition's amendments which lack ambition and fail to respond to the big issues that we are facing in terms of a COVID recovery or climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stone.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Lord Mayor, I was reminded by Facebook, it was 10 years ago yesterday that the last Lib Dem budget was passed by this council, marking 7 years of below inflation council tax rises. Tonight, we are talking about a council tax increase 7 times the current rate of inflation. Councillor Ali talks of Labour talking in this chamber to themselves. I suggest they might want to talk to Councillor Forbes about his recent comments, which I think many citizens in Newcastle would agree with. I quote, "After the year we've had, more tax for reduced local services is not just the wrong policy, it is a slap in the face for everyone who has sacrificed so much for the national effort. What we need is a bit of hope, a vision of a better future, and a plan to get there. We have to come out of this stronger. We have to start afresh by building a better, more ambitious city where everyone has the chance to get on. That should be where we set our sights. Asking people to pay more and get less does not sound like a useful part of that vision to me." Now, those were the words of the leader of the council just a few weeks ago. So if that is what he believes, why is his administration doing the complete opposite? If he believes paying more and getting less is not a useful part of a vision for the city, why are they making it the foundation?
We've lost you, Councillor Stone. Have you muted yourself?
It's just a flash up saying someone has muted me. I hope that's not the case. Those were the words of the suspicion is the administration knows it's an easier option for them to denounce the government while making the taxpayers of Newcastle pay as much as they can squeeze out of them. I think the party opposite knows the local government funding is broken and that council taxes are rotten and an unequal system which hits those on low and fixed incomes hardest. And I think they know their administration is overseeing a budget that is fraying the connection between local council tax and basic services that residents expect to the breaking point. Now, it suits the Labour narrative to pretend there is no choice and there are no options. But a council with more vision, more responsive to the wishes of the public, more courage, more compassion does have options. For a start, it has the option not to insult the bereaved by raising charges for live streaming of funerals, but callously it is choosing to do so. If we accept, and I hope we all do, that the local government funding system is broken and the council tax system is broken, it would be honourable and honest with the public to admit that the vast majority of the council tax they pay is not going on the delivery of services they need and use. It goes not on maintaining their city, but on maintaining this council and its interests. It will be honourable and honest to be upfront with them and admit that 2/3 of their council tax goes on services which we have a statutory obligation to provide, to tell them that we need to ensure those services are there to meet the needs of those who need protection and help, but this council is currently unable to sustain them at their current level. The leader could be using his position as Labour's leader in local government and his influence with Keir Starmer to make the case for fundamental reform of local government funding and council tax, but instead he's choosing to max the tax and blame the Tories. An effective and far-sighted leader could take the opportunity to set out an agenda for reform, for a new settlement for social care, for a joint North of Tyne structure with the NHS for integrated care funded by a dedicated tax stream, for a fair and progressive system of local income tax, for new ways of raising revenue to create the better, more ambitious city he speaks of, which cannot be delivered solely by always relying on more money from central government, whatever political colour it is. So Amendment 2 is a revenue raising measure that helps to achieve the objectives of the council in reducing traffic congestion, improving air quality and achieving net zero. One that Councillor Ainsley and Councillor Avery should bear in mind is under consideration by Leicester, Reading, Oxford, Cambridge, Bristol, Hounslow and Camden, all of them Labour. It will enable investment in sustainable travel like electric park and ride services and better maintain roads and pavements, not gimmicks like e-scooters. Residents of the city have a right to expect this, but there's been little or no maintenance, not even a condition inspection across the city for years under this administration. I've learned just today that the council's backlog in road and pavement maintenance has risen from £116 million to £184 million, £109 million of that alone in footpath maintenance backlog since the last time they assessed it 3 years ago. So Amendment 2 starts to put that right. It will end the administration's disgraceful plans to charge disabled blue badge holders to park in the city's car parks. And we know charging for parking is not popular, but we think it is preferable to charge those who choose to park in the city centre rather than use other forms of transport than make everyone in the city pay more through their council tax. So we're giving the party opposite the chance to make a progressive step forward tonight in raising the revenue the city needs to deliver the services it needs and the ambition it claims it sets its sights to. So we challenge them to take that step. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Now, we know that the Tories will always look after their friends and that we've been able to expose Tory waste with hundreds of millions of pounds being handed to companies associated with the Conservative Party and for contracts that have failed to deliver for the NHS and essential workers and for public safety. And their lies in promising to give local authorities the resources needed to get through the pandemic. We know it is the current government and the previous coalition government's austerity-driven agenda that has got us to where we are today. Our public services being hollowed out, carved up and starved of cash on the back of the opposition's track record of freezing child benefit, freezing public sector pay, cuts to housing benefits, student fees, privatisation of the probation services, and who can forget the massive unnecessary reorganisational change to our NHS. As a result, we have local authorities like ours having to rely on less and less central government funding and instead having to commit staff time and resources to bid for short-term funding, meaning it's ever more challenging to plan and deliver services. And yet, despite this, we are putting forward a budget tonight that delivers for the people of Newcastle, which is in stark contrast to the feeble amendments put forward by the opposition. I use the word opposition, but to be honest, what they have produced does not show them to be the effective opposition the people of Newcastle deserve. In relation to housing, we've got a detailed list of achievements in a budget that sets a clear vision for the future. We've seen the highest levels of housing investment in 30 years. We're committed to reducing our carbon footprint using modern methods of construction, such as modular homes, whilst also finding new ways to insulate existing properties. This will not only help people save money, but will also help us tackle the climate emergency too. We will continue to invest in our affordable and accessible homes for rent, some with on-site care and accessible bungalows. As well as these being much needed homes for Newcastle residents, they also allow us to achieve savings in social care too. Our work on homelessness prevention has achieved recognition by the United Nations, as we were the first city in the world to be awarded a World Habitat Gold Award. Our work with YHN also received recognition as they were awarded a UK Housing Award for their work on homelessness prevention. We have formed the citywide Street Zero partnership and have partnered with Crisis, the homelessness charity, to develop ambitious plans to end homelessness in Newcastle within 10 years. We're the first local authority in England to build rent-to-buy homes, giving first-time buyers an opportunity to take their first step onto the housing ladder, allowing them to rent their property at an affordable level and to save for a deposit. This was such a popular scheme that it's something we will be looking to replicate. Lord Mayor, what we've been through and what lies ahead deserves a proper thought out and realistic response, and that's what our budget proposals outline. A road to recovery from the devastation COVID-19 has brought on our families and our communities. A plan that sees our city continue to grow, that protects our most vulnerable and places value in our public services and those who deliver them. A plan that sees Newcastle as an active part of a global community, a city that people are proud to call home. I see nothing of any substance in the opposition's amendments to tackle this crisis brought on by the pandemic, and therefore I support the budget and reject the opposition's amendments. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. There is no doubt last year has been very difficult for the council. The staff have worked incredibly hard to keep the key services in our city running as smoothly as possible. As a member of this chamber and as a healthcare professional, I am very proud of the incredible work of our public health and social care teams. I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their hard work. We have been battling a global pandemic, which certainly poses financial difficulties for this council this year's budget. I have no doubt this is made even more difficult by the total disregard of the Tory government for local councils and local governance. They keep talking about narrowing the north-south divide, but I'm afraid it is unlikely that we see any meaningful difference under a Tory government. The people of Newcastle expect this council to be the guardian of local services in the face of a callous Tory government. But sadly, what this budget offers is far from that. It is not unreasonable to expect this council to have a budget that offers the city a much needed boost in leisure facilities, but unfortunately, we are seeing the exact opposite. The Labour administration is closing West Denton Pool without offering an adequate alternative. Even if the proposed new facility is open, it will leave the local people without a pool for several years, and without any guarantees that the new pool will be of the same standards. Labour's 2019 general election manifesto committed to stopping outsourcing and specifically mentions bringing leisure facilities back in-house. Therefore, I would have expected this administration to work closely with the voluntary and charity sector to offer the best solution to tackle health inequalities in the city. But these hard-working charities are very dismayed with the way that the running of leisure facilities in the city is handed to external contractors, which do not necessarily put people of Newcastle first. This administration has proposed sudden axing of funding for public health programs that promote physical activity and healthy food. Lack of notice for organizations that provide these programs leaves them in a very difficult position, and it makes the council weaker in our battle against health inequalities in Newcastle. This budget does not offer any explanation on how our park and nature reserves are going to be maintained and looked after, either through the City Council or Urban Green Newcastle. There has been no action on Kingston Park Green or Havana Nature Reserves, for example. These sites that offer our residents much needed green space suffer from chronic neglect and lack of maintenance. Finally, Lord Mayor, culture events play a vital role in regeneration of the city post-pandemic. But I really think this administration has missed the point. What they are offering is woefully inadequate. I would urge the Labour administration to carefully examine how culture investment fund is allocated to have the maximum possible impact. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kilgour.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have to say, I was a bit surprised and extremely disappointed at the opposition's comments in their press release about residents paying for unresponsive services, particularly in light of their warm words tonight. Lord Mayor, I don't think adult social care services could be any more responsive. Over this last year, staff have risen to the challenge of the pandemic and have responded to those challenges magnificently, changing the way they work, redesigning and delivering services in COVID-secure ways, and offering outreach support where appropriate. We've seen everything from developing pathways for safe hospital discharge, right through to procurement and delivery of PPE. Rises in safeguarding alerts investigated in a timely manner, through to wraparound support for residential care. Contact with over 8,000 people who've been asked to shield and support to City Lifeline, and everything in between. And I know other directorates have been equally agile. To suggest that those staff and the services that they deliver, the same staff we've been thanking rightly at every council meeting recently, including tonight, have been unresponsive, particularly during this last year, is insulting, frankly. Lord Mayor, this budget cannot be seen in isolation. This budget follows 10 long years of sustained government cuts to the public sector, with councils like ours bearing the brunt. If there were ever any easy or simple savings to be made, they were made a long time ago. Nevertheless, our proposals for adult social care for next year and beyond remain focused on two key principles: making sure we provide a level of support that is appropriate and proportionate to the needs of the people we support, and ensuring we provide the right types of support that enable people to live as independently as possible in their own communities. I doubt there's anyone in this meeting tonight who doesn't recognise the national funding crisis in social care. ADAS, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, yesterday called on government to implement a three-point plan. Firstly, short-term government funding to stabilise the system, including respite for exhausted staff and carers. Secondly, a commitment from government to longer-term funding through a 10-year plan, starting with recovery from the current crisis and moving into major investment in preventative community services. And finally, reform that transforms social care into a pillar of a 21st century welfare state, delivering high quality services and support to those who need them in their own communities. Sadly, but not unsurprisingly, the Chancellor neglected to mention social care at all in his budget speech today and failed, again, to listen to the sector or to recognise the potential for adult social care to help drive economic recovery. We will, of course, continue to lobby government for fair funding and reform, but until the Prime Minister delivers on his long overdue promise to tackle the social care crisis, we have no choice given the increasing demand for services, but to charge the full social care precept. Again, I think we're all agreed tonight that council tax is a regressive form of taxation and that the social care precept is the government's way of shunting costs from the Treasury to those areas that can least afford it and where demand for services is higher. But it is the only option available to us if we want to avoid further cuts to our adult social care budget and therefore to some of the most important services we provide. Lord Mayor, none of this is easy. And yet we have avoided salami slicing budgets, Councillor Kane, and are proposing innovative approaches to changing our models of care which put the well-being of our service users first. Of course, there are unknowns and risks we can't fully mitigate in the year ahead. We don't know what the long-term impact of COVID will be on our residents' mental and physical health. We don't know how many people will suffer from long COVID and how that might increase demand for services. And we don't know if other, more virulent strains of COVID will emerge. But having said all of that, the people who use social care services, the staff who deliver social care across the city, and the services themselves are amazing, and we should be so proud of them. The budget we're presenting tonight is the best way we have of protecting those services for the people who need them, and I hope colleagues will support it unamended tonight. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lovatt.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wish to support the amendment proposed and would like to speak on Amendment 2 in particular, roads and pavements, an area which residents raise as concern, and I'd like to highlight why we need to invest in this area. I do note that there are regular surveys conducted at various frequencies determined by criticality on roads and pavements. However, I'm unable to confirm that the council are targeting the areas that council taxpayers identify as concern. When researching this subject, I reviewed the council's own ward, road and pavement reports, which are available on the council website. These reports, dated in February 2018, identify multiple road and pavement schemes across the whole of the city. In my own ward of Fordon and West Gosforth, there are 16 road and pavement schemes identified with multiple areas rated as poor and deteriorating. Many of these pavements and roads are still poor and deteriorating even further after 3 years. I'd say even more would meet the criteria of possible schemes, adding to the backlog of schemes already discussed. I'm sure councillors can identify additional schemes that are in such state in their own wards. In Redhouse Farm, along the bus route of Caldwell Road and Acombe Crescent and Belsay Gardens, the road is breaking up and subsiding in numerous areas. There are multiple potholes and damage which have been reported and filled and patched and reported and filled and patched over and over again. Yes, when these potholes get reported through Envirocall, they're mostly repaired within the allocated time period. But are you aware that the continuous temporary repairs are costing the council 3 to 5 times more to repair than planned permanent fixes or patches? Is this efficiency? Another example I can give is the junction of Rothbury Avenue and Wansbeck Road South, where in 2019 a resident requiring the use of a walker fell due to the poor road condition. The junction has dropped curbs at both sides, encouraging residents and pedestrians to cross there. The junction is also identified in the Ward Road and Pavement Report of 2018 as a possible scheme. I asked for the surface to be relayed and was told it did not meet the resurfacing criteria despite being identified as a possible scheme in the 2018 report. A year plus later, this junction has deteriorated even further, and I'm sure there'll be examples such as this across the whole of the city in all of the councillors' wards. Our amendment will provide a much needed boost to roads and pavements across all wards. I support our amendments. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Frew.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Of course, I speak in favour of the budget. No doubt we all have aspirations for our residents in the city beyond the resources that we have. However, that's the budget that we're able to deliver, and along with my colleagues, I stand by it. The rhetoric from the Liberal Democrats has been much grander than their amendments would lead me to think. I do not see any serious vision for the city across the patchwork that they've offered. It merely seems to be fiddling at the edges. And it's continually disappointing that after 3 speeches that Councillor Ferguson has given on this, he continues to ask for strategy when there's 200 pages in front of them and his own party don't seem to be providing a strategy. On council tax, the burden of local services has continually been pushed onto local residents. I'm proud that the council has been ameliorating that through the council tax reduction scheme. It is the Conservative government that keeps pushing it onto residents who are least able to afford it. The Prime Minister today claimed that Conservative councils have lower levels of council tax, and it's a claim that he can only make because of the way that the Tories have been tilting the table in favour of wealthy Southern Tory councils over the last 11 years. Councils that are able to fall back on business rates in ways that Northern authorities are not. And it was quite interesting that he mentioned Westminster Council, where only recently the deputy leader had to quit because of his dodgy relations with developers, which no doubt is the kind of money that's funding Westminster Council. Council tax was never a well-designed system to begin with. However, the Tories have been pushing it to breaking point and pushing it in favour of their own constituents. And social care as well. I share the disappointment of everyone that the budget did not address this issue. The Conservatives have been claiming that they're going to provide a serious review of the funding, and they have continued to not do this, to not set out any vision on this. For this council, adult social care has become a continually increasing proportion of the budget. Combined with children's social care, this is over half of the council's budget. So addressing Councillor Stone's shameful comments, over half of this council's funding and spend goes into directly helping people who need it. And if that's not of interest to him, well, that's his problem. I'm quite unclear why the Lib Dems seem to think the answer is to continue with the sticking plaster of these precepts. There have been continuous opportunities for the government to address this, and they have not done so. And I don't see how asking the question in any different way is going to get through to this government, because they seem to not care. I'm also unclear how much time the opposition have spent looking at the parking charge suggestion that they have made. We had a meeting very recently, which Councillor Hall attended, in which we discussed the way that these are decided and how these are decided on the basis of demand of these specific car parks and what works for each one. Simply increasing for the sake of revenue doesn't really work. And sometimes, in one case that we discussed, reducing the cost actually improves the revenue. And on the voluntary sector, the opposition demand the council commit to the voluntary sector. I find this quite confusing, because this council has quite clearly committed to the voluntary sector through the work it has been doing with organisations throughout the pandemic. Voluntary sectors has really stepped up to help people in local communities, and the council has been working with them throughout this. It is clearly a relationship that will be built on going forward. And addressing Councillor Kane's comments, I think he would do well to explain the full statement from Newcastle Connected Voice, in which they firstly said that they recognise the pressure that the council is under, and they also note that what money is being spent in the voluntary sector by the council is better focused locally than before. And the final specific point I'll say, I was quite confused by Councillor Huddart's point on council housing, because the council has a very good record of delivering bungalows, supported and sheltered housing, which I've seen across many wards, and I've seen the quality of this housing, and I think it's very good. And I think that really is a credit to this council. To sum up, to my residents and residents across the city, I say this Labour Council delivers the best it can. Our aspirations will always be greater, but we have to work within our means. Our priorities are always to work to address the poverty, the deprivation that has been inflicted on our city by Tory callousness, to continue delivering for communities that we're rooted in, and to work towards a green recovery. I support this budget.
Thank you. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The country's finances, alongside that of local government, have been stretched to the limit because of the current pandemic. Council officers and councillors deserve credit for their efforts in trying to mitigate through cost pressures that the council faces. And broadly, the public are facing many of these cost pressures across the whole of our city. The words of senior politicians across the country have expressed concern about council tax rises, and I believe that whilst the council has, through government support, set up a hardship fund, whilst this will inevitably support some residents, it does leave a great burden with others. Nearly 5% increase is a lot to bear in these difficult times. The council budget brings forward a number of cuts to key services that local people rely on. This includes changes to school meals, library services, local environmental services, rent rises, parking, pest control, and bulky waste collections. Not to mention, of course, the introduction of charging disabled drivers for parking and the pressures on social care. One charge, which I think is a step too far, is the charge for the digital streaming of funeral services. Lord Mayor, as I said in my initial remarks, I do understand and accept the pressures that this council faces, but I feel that there is a set position to raise council tax to the maximum allowed. We haven't got to forget that this administration raised the yearly average council tax rises from 1997 to 2004 by 8%. To freeze council tax or to reduce it to a more bearable level could mean dipping into the reserves, which would ease the burden on the public and should be seriously considered as an option. The council could, of course, have used the 5.5 million of additional government grant to help everyone with their council tax. The views expressed by May residents is that the nearly 5% council tax rise is too much in these current difficult times. The views also expressed by residents is that they can understand capital expenditure on big government projects, which help the country as a whole. They fail, however, to understand the capital investments of the council, from a 4-star hotel to the ever-increasing spend at the civic centre, when they can see close by, within their community, resources such as the Outer West Pool closed. Lord Mayor, I would like to end as I started. I understand the difficulties. I just feel there could have been other solutions to this budget. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor John Paul Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It would be lovely to be an independent politician, to innocently pretend you're not a politician, but then spend your entire life political point scoring without having any of the courage to take any of the responsibility yourself. From Councillor Donnelly's contribution there, he clearly doesn't have the first clue. This has been an exceptional year. We are lucky we have exceptional staff who came up with solutions to deliver local services in the most challenging of times. Bin collection rates have been outstanding in the circumstances. Staff from Public Safety and Regulation have provided a 24/7 service to support, monitor, regulate and enforce COVID legislation and guidance. The opposition seem to think that we have an infinite amount of money to resurface whatever road they are delivering their out of focus on that week. I really don't know what's difficult to understand. You got the benefit from a Labour government. You got the benefit from proper funding. Then you work with your Tory mates to slash our funding with inevitable consequences. Either you are economically incompetent or just plain disingenuous, useless or dishonest. Which is it? All of this comes at a cost, and this is what is reflected in the budget. But what is truly reflected in the budget is our commitment to delivering the Newcastle Waste Strategy, our commitment to improve our services in line with our net zero ambitions, a commitment to protecting our environment by grass cutting and tackling weeds despite the best efforts of some fringe campaigners to reduce the appearance and infrastructure of our neighbourhoods, a commitment to working in collaboration such as City Lifeline and our net zero work, a commitment to protecting those in need, in most need, a commitment to protecting our staff from bullying, a commitment to being open and transparent about all disclosures, a commitment not to accept Newcastle as a city in decline, a commitment to tackling all inequalities. Yes, we tackle inequalities. The opposition just gives sexist a slap on the wrist. No integrity. And speaking of incompetence, have the Tories reimbursed us in full for the extra cost of dealing with the pandemic? The extra regulatory costs? How do we? No, they have forced us to increase the regressive council tax. Have the Tories supported Newcastle in today's budget? No, they've supported their mates in Teesside and Darlington. Have the Tories followed the rules about contracts worth millions? No, they've supported the mates. Have the Tories given us confidence that they care about Newcastle? Not in the slightest. This is the most incompetent government in living memory. They have the integrity of a dead hedgehog and the economic aptitude of a decomposing woodlouse. At least now we have hope of a Labour government in the not too distant future to put the heart, soul and credibility back into this country and restore the resources back into local services which the Lib Dems cut. I'm proud to be part of this administration and our commitment to build forward better. I urge members to support the sensible budget and to reject the incompetent amendments. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Please indicate to me. I'm not seeing anyone. Yes, it's, yeah. Okay. Right, Councillor Cott, you reserve the right to speak, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And I too would like to thank officers for all their work, all that goes on across the city at this time, especially this time of crisis. And here we're looking to build for the future. Certainly when the chips are down, Newcastle unites, and I hope that will continue as we move forward. Some of the things I wanted to raise in this particular discussion, but first of all, I just wanted to say something about Amendment 3, which is very close to my heart, because I do believe very passionately that we can involve the voluntary sector, the community sector, more in the work that this council does. We realise that there's a considerable amount of work that's going on already around helping children and young people and families and around food poverty. But recently, it has actually been the Liberal Democrats who have been pushing for community solutions to food poverty, digital exclusion, tackling educational inequalities, and highlighting the needs for skills and training in this chamber. We believe that local grassroots organisations need to be involved at every level, and we see the impact that they have in terms of early intervention and prevention. Now, the community and voluntary sector have told us in their budget responses to the consultation and elsewhere that they feel a little let down by the council, that actually in the new world it feels like some of them are being excluded. We know that the council will try to do its best, but it can do more. And we believe that we can grow and safeguard community solutions through the Newcastle Fund. Remember, a fund that was set up by the Liberal Democrats, and we have year on year sought to support more than the current administration through this fund. We believe this gives us more bangs for our bucks. Lord Mayor, I was very, very annoyed to see this evening on a Labour Twitter feed that they are claiming that we want to give children dinners off the pavements. How dare Labour talk in those terms? And I hope that someone will withdraw that comment. We want local communities to be strong and vibrant, and we want to tackle child poverty. We have ambition for this city, more ambition than you will ever realise. Moving on to other issues that I think we need to discuss today. There have been a number of comments made which I think do need to be challenged. Councillor Bell, I hope you will withdraw your comments about loans, which were totally wrong. Councillor Frew, we are not able to provide a strategy with the budget consultation, with the amendments we bring forward. We're only allowed to bring the amendments. I think this is something you may already know. Now, this budget has been one of the most important budgets of our generation, and we need to see vision. We need to see vision for a way forward for the future. What we have here, in many senses, is a short-term sticking plaster. As has been made out, we have not seen a 5-year plan, which other local authorities have been putting into place. Yes, we realise there are huge pressures around adult social care and children's social care. Yes, we realise the iniquities of council tax. Yes, we realise the government needs to do more. But what do we hear from Labour? Over and over again, that same rhetoric, same old rhetoric, that Labour hasn't ever done anything wrong. You would think that this Labour administration had not been in power for 10 years. Of course, there will be things that you're accountable for. Of course, there will be things that you can do better. Yes, the government can do more, but stop blaming everyone else but yourselves for everything that goes wrong in this city. Where is your vision that lies behind this budget? We've heard a number of points, very interesting points, and many aspirations, which I would totally agree with. But it's all very well to talk about issues. Where's the strategic vision and the plan that sits behind that? We do not have that. This is a budget as ever under this Labour administration, which is a series of service cuts with a political narrative. And a budget which expects someone else to pay for all the costs, all the cost pressures, and conflates the existing crisis with the budget planning for the longer term. With no immediate sense of the seriousness of the task facing it, this administration may well wish to leave the building and replace itself with a new administration which is capable of stepping up to the challenge. Lord Mayor, despite our reservations, we have jumped through all the restrictive hoops that Labour have imposed upon us in formulating our amendments, and yet we have still managed to do a better job than you in protecting council tax. A huge rise affects a lot of people. We've tried to do something about that, despite the difficulties. We've been better on the environment, better on basic services, and on protecting businesses and culture, and on working with the voluntary sector, and on assisting the disadvantaged. Imagine what we could do if we were able to really rethink our ways of doing things, and we were truly planning for the future with a more fit-for-purpose approach, focused, as Councillor Ferguson said at the beginning, around a policy-led financial plan as opposed to a finance-led policy. We hope that the administration will see sense in our proposals and will support them. Very misleadingly, one or two speakers have mentioned that some of these proposals are undeliverable, and yet the Section 151 officer has said they are perfectly deliverable. I hope that they will listen to our calls for long-term plans for the city, for a more fit-for-purpose budget. I hope they will stop making excuses and using others as scapegoats. We all want to do what's best for this city. Let's not make it hard for ourselves by pretending that things are different as they are. And let's move forward. Let's vote for these amendments, and let's await an opportunity for a time where we can sit and go through the budget line by line, and we can start again and plan really for the future, because the years ahead are going to be very tough, and we need to meet them with challenges, not with the sticking plastering over the cracks. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Carty, you reserve the right to speak. McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And can I first of all say thank you to all of my colleagues in the administration who've contributed to what has been a very high quality debate from the administration this evening. Lord Mayor, I'd also like to place on record thanks to all of the staff who've been involved in the budget process. I know how hard it is under normal circumstances, but the challenge that we've had this year, given the pandemic and the in-year cuts that we've had to make, meant that this process has been tighter than normal. Having said all of that, Lord Mayor, I think our proposals here are measured, reasonable, they're ambitious and set out a clear vision for the future of this city. Lord Mayor, as a sector, as many of my colleagues have said, we've been hit massively hard. 10 years of austerity and the current £2 billion hit on council taxpayers across the country tells us the real story of what this government care about, and it certainly isn't the people of the North East. I think that real story has to be shared right across our city. And Lord Mayor, as colleagues have said, the one-year settlement doesn't give us time to put in place longer-term plans to transform services. So we know that this year has been tricky. And before I turn to the amendments, Lord Mayor, some of the contradictory remarks we've had this evening about don't increase council tax, but we want better services are just not deliverable. Colleagues have said we need to invest in cultural events, but the proposals in front of us propose cutting them. Lord Mayor, I'm so angry with some of the speeches that we've heard this evening. We are optimistic, we are ambitious, and we will not be voting in support of these amendments. Lord Mayor, let's just turn to, and before I do, Councillor Ferguson asked about the significant increases that we've made to council tax, which is indeed true. Over the last 3 years, this year and the previous 3 years, we've had to impose that council tax precept to fund social care, as Councillor Kilgour clearly set out. For 4 years of the 10 years of this administration, we made no increase to council tax. We froze council tax. We would love to be able to do that now. We're unable to do that because of austerity 10 years, which the administration were part of, remember, Lord Mayor, in making those challenging cuts to local authority spends. On the proposal, Lord Mayor, to change the council tax charge, and when you look at this in detail, Lord Mayor, this is 0.5% of of almost 5% increase. That's 11 pence per week for those council taxpayers in Band A. I want to say, get real to the opposition in relation to this. Lord Mayor, if we are opening up the city, we want people to come into the city, have a purpose for coming here. We want them to use our retail and hospitality offer. We need that funding to help our economy from the money that some of us have saved last year from not being on holiday. We want people to bring that funding into our city to invest it. That's a part of our investment in our future hope for this city. We do have a future, we have an exciting future as a city, and we will continue to deliver that to the best of our ability. And Lord Mayor, in relation to council tax, the mitigation that we have put in place, which is very, very clear in our IIA, we're taking thousands of people out of paying any council tax at all. That will help the least well off. And of course, Lord Mayor, we will continue to monitor that situation because we continue to be really worried about the potential increase in unemployment, the challenges on our local residents, and actually just the general cuts in credit and benefits across the city, which is taking hundreds of millions of pounds away from the poorest in our region. Lord Mayor, on the third amendment, I think Councillor Frew put this very, very clearly. I do welcome the support from the opposition for the voluntary and community sector. This administration has always worked closely and indeed are extremely honest in the amount of money that we spend in the voluntary and community sector. And we will, of course, work with them to deliver proposals and services in our city. The voluntary and community sector already do that, Lord Mayor. The amendment looks as if the spend on the Newcastle Fund is kind of cost neutral. Well, Lord Mayor, that is not right. Officers have to spend time in working out those proposals. The finance team have to deal with dishing out the money. All of that has a cost. You can't ignore that. And Lord Mayor, just to reinforce what colleagues have said, we've sought support throughout the pandemic from the voluntary and community sector. They have helped us to address the food poverty crisis in our city. City Lifeline, as the leader said, has been overseen by the voluntary sector, and we will continue to make food poverty everybody's business. We're much better able, working together in a true partnership, to deliver services with the sector than we are in trying to create antagonism and opposition. Lord Mayor, and Amendment 3 talks about investing that support in children, young people and families. I think our recent work with Leeds City Council, the investment that we are now placing in Children and Families Newcastle is a significant contribution to the work that we need to do in leaving no child behind, as well as what we're trying to do in terms of giving children in our city a real voice, listening to them and doing all that we can to address the issues of child poverty, which have obviously, as colleagues have said, been exacerbated over the last year. It's really, really apparent. And to reassure everyone in council this evening that this administration will continue to do all it can to tackle those inequalities. In reading the IIA on this particular proposal, Lord Mayor, it tells me that although we're making savings in delivering that service, every aspect of the service will be better. Now, I think that's actually a really positive step. Not only are we transforming the way we do things, but we're using funding from elsewhere, and the families in our city will be better off because of that work.
Can you wind up, please?
I can, of course. Lord Mayor, I would like to say that the report before us has been shared widely across the city. It's been honestly and transparently considered and consulted upon. I want to thank all of those who have responded to the consultation. The IIAs have been amended, and although proposals are unchanged, our mitigations, I think, are much clearer. Lord Mayor, I'm very happy to second the budget that is before us. I ask Council to reject the amendments from the opposition, and I look forward to us delivering quality services and demonstrating our ambition for the future for this city. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone who's contributed this evening. I'll now call on Councillor Forbes to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's surely a happy coincidence that you wait for ages for a budget and then two come along at once. Thankfully, at least one of the budgets today sets out a plan for investment in our city, creating a better future for future generations. I'd like to start off by thanking all of those senior officers and staff who've worked very hard on the budget in the last few months. It's not easy work. It's required a lot of extra work on top of the work that's gone on to deal with the COVID crisis. And I know that on behalf of Council, we're all very grateful to have such dedicated and professional officer support in the senior management team. I'd also like to thank members for their contributions this evening. Many have been insightful, thoughtful and passionate. Some have been a bit confused and some, frankly, rather baffling. But I'm grateful to members for their general understanding of the financial context that we find ourselves in as a council. I think we all agree that council tax as a system of funding local government is unfair, regressive and desperately in need of reform. But politics is about dealing the hand that you're given, not constantly asking for fresh cards. And although this particular set of documents sets out a one-year spending plan, it does set out a direction of travel for our council and our city for the future. Of course, if the Lib Dems applied the same principle of multi-year budget standards to their own amendments as they're calling for tonight, then they would surely have explained to everybody this evening how they would have made up the shortfall in income that would have resulted from their lack of action to refurbish the civic centre and generate rental income. They would have put forward an explanation of the costs, the ongoing costs of the loans that they took out when they were in office for road and pavement repairs, where we're still paying back the borrowing on those. And we've had another example of Lib Dem financial incompetence this evening with the suggestion of £2.4 million of loans for small businesses in the city. Well, given that we've got more than 10,000 small businesses, a loan of £240 each is not going to amount to a huge amount of additional support. And Councillor Ferguson talks about honesty. Honestly, Lord Mayor, this is the party that betrayed the trust of thousands of students by reneging on their promise on tuition fees. At least the one thing that you can rely on for the Lib Dems to be consistent about is their spinelessness. And Councillor Ferguson and others have talked about a lack of vision. Well, what's the net zero action plan if it's not a compelling vision for how we protect the planet? What's the collaborative Newcastle programme if it's not a compelling vision of integrated health and care services that support people at crucial times in their lives? What's the city recovery plan if it's not a vision of how we help businesses and our economy through the difficult months ahead and create the jobs of the future? What's the Lib Dem vision set out tonight? Pavements polished so much that you can eat your dinner off them, more tree pruning and fill in a few potholes. Well, you might as well chuck in free unicorns all round and bread and milk for hedgehogs. And the Tory budget today, Lord Mayor, has said nothing about local government funding, nothing about social care, nothing about teachers, nothing about schools, nothing about children and young people, nothing about tackling inequalities, nothing about climate change. The country needed a fresh start today to recover from COVID, but the Tory budget was a lost opportunity. In contrast, our budget proposals this evening set out a compelling vision for Newcastle as a great place to be born and grow up, a great place to live and work, a great place to grow old with dignity. We have a vision of our city where inequalities are reduced and we act collectively to protect the planet. We have a vision of a city which embraces the values of fairness, ambition and pride. This budget, Lord Mayor, sets out a direction of travel for the future of Newcastle, recovering from COVID, building forward better, building forward fairer, building forward greener. And I urge colleagues to reject the amendments and support the budget this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. We'll now move on to a name vote to each of the amendments in turn. Please use GoVote, and if you're unable to, please raise your hand on the raise hand function or indicate in the chat, and I'll call on you to give your vote verbally. And given that I've forgotten my phone this evening, I will vote verbally myself. So if I can ask our IT team to set up the GoVote on amendment number 1, please, which is the amendment on council tax increases and associated budget balancing. Is the amendment agreed?
Yes.
No, you're deluded.
It's going to be a go vote.
Yes, don't be rude.
No.
No. No, we're going to go vote. There's no need to make any comments unless you can't do a go vote. Councillor Huddart, you've got your hand up. Is that for GoVote?
Sorry, yes, it is, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Right, so are you wishing to indicate your vote?
Yeah.
So is the amendment agreed? Councillor Huddart?
Yes, yes, it does. Sorry, the GoVote just takes, if I click into it, it takes me into Newcastle voting for a political party and not, you know, it takes me into the elections office, basically.
And Councillor Schofield, are you voting?
Yes, please. No to the amendment.
Right, can you both put your hands down, please? Councillor, Councillor Huddart, do you have anything else to contribute? Say, your hand's still up.
Oh, is it?
Okay, just to indicate that I'm abstaining, and the amendment is defeated. So if we can move on to Amendment 2, which is the workplace parking levy. Is the amendment agreed?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No. To go vote.
Yeah.
Apart from Councillor Schofield, will you please?
No.
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 Councillor Huddart?
Yes, Lord Mayor, I support it.
Yeah, and I'm abstaining.
No, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, sorry, GoVote suddenly disappeared. I'm in favour of the amendment.
Yes.
I think there's someone else.
Me too.
I'm not getting it either. Councillor Kane here. I'm voting in favour.
Councillor Kane?
No. GoVote seems to have gone on the blink.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not getting it either, Lord Mayor.
Lord Mayor, I'm not getting it either. Stephen
Yeah, I've lost it as well, Lord Mayor.
I'll try and.
Yes, I have.
Okay, everybody quiet, please.
I'm in favour of it.
Lord Mayor, it's Jordan from IT.
Thank you, Jordan. I was just going to call you.
I was just, yeah, if you just be clear if we want to go to GoVote, and then I can open up the vote. So if you would like me to do one now, then I can open it.
Please. Sorry, this is still for Amendment 2 then.
Yeah.
And we've recorded Councillor Schofield and Huddart.
Lord Mayor, Stephen Lambert speaking. It's not working. No to the amendment. If you could record that, please. Not working.
Right. Can I ask our ICT team if this is going to be able to be used?
No.
Thank you. It's back
No,
up.
it's now working now.
Right. So we've recorded Councillors Huddart and Schofield. Anybody else?
Lord Mayor, Councillor Kemp is having trouble with the Wi-Fi, so he hasn't been able to vote either because he's been kicked off it. But he is voting no, all of them.
I think I've got to hear him say it.
Okay, okay.
Lord Mayor, Stephen Lambert, I've got it working.
Right.
Lord Mayor, Brenda Hindmarsh, and mine's not working.
So, Councillor Hindmarsh, are you voting how to this amendment?
I'm voting yes to the amendment.
Right. We've got that recorded. Is there anyone who doesn't think they've had the vote recorded? Okay, the amendment is defeated. We can move on to amendment number 3, which is on community and voluntary sector support. Can I ask ICT please to put the GoVote up, new GoVote, and is the amendment agreed?
No. Number 7.
No.
Not working. Oh, it's
Councillor Schofield.
Lord Mayor, it doesn't seem to have refreshed.
Can I ask ICT if this is, which vote that's showing now is 3?
It says vote 7.
Yeah, so on screen it should be vote 7 because we refreshed the screen between each one. So
Yes,
vote 7 should be the one on screen.
Okay, so this is amendment 3. We've recorded verbally votes of councillors Schofield and Huddart. So the amendment is, and I'm abstaining, the amendment is defeated. So amendment 4, please, ICT, if we can go on to vote 8, which is on the COVID-19 Rescue Loans Fund. Is the amendment agreed?
No.
No.
Yes.
Go vote should be coming up.
No, Lord Mayor Stephen Lambert.
No, Lord Mayor.
That's Councillor Schofield and Councillor Huddart.
Yes, please.
Right, let's vote 8 up now.
No, Lord Mayor.
Yes, we've got you.
Well, it's not coming up.
No.
What seat are you? Councillor Schofield, which seat are you?
87, and it's not coming up at all. None
Right.
of them have.
Right. Okay. Well,
I'm 73, but
I'm assured our officers have recorded it.
Okay, that's fine.
So the amendment 4 is also defeated. Then.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, can I just check?
Certainly.
Councillor Hindmarsh, has she been able to vote at all?
Yeah.
And Councillor Huddart.
voting against.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone whose vote isn't recorded there? I can see some odd responses. I'm abstaining again. The motion is agreed. The report presented under item 7 is carried. So, thank you, colleagues. If we can now move on to item 8, which is a proposed exemption from attendance at council meetings. I'm calling on Councillor Jackie Robinson to move the report. Councillor Robinson.
Lord Mayor, can I help by moving this formally?
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Durrant, I believe you will second it.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally second.
Does anyone wish to speak to the report, the proposed exemption?
Just to say that Jackie's muted. Jackie, you need to unmute.
Well, the report has been moved and seconded. So no one's indicated they wish to speak. There is a hand up, but I can't see who it is.
I think it's from previous, Lord Mayor.
Linda Wright, Lord Mayor.
Right. Councillor Wright, do you wish to speak?
Sorry, no, I hadn't realised it was up. I'll take it down now.
Thank you. Thank you. Does council then agree to the recommendations in the report?
Agreed, Lord Mayor.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed, Lord Mayor.
Agreed. So that exemption is agreed. Item 9, one written question was received this month and the reply is included in the items circulating for meeting pack. So item 10 is the cabinet member update from the Deputy Leader and Resources. I call on Councillor McCarthy to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. In view of the time, I'll be really quick in introducing this. Lord Mayor, I want to say that 10 sides of A4 does not do justice to the work that I've been involved in over the year in my very wide-ranging portfolio. I think, Lord Mayor, everything this year has to be seen through the prism of COVID. I think, you know, as we've done on many occasions before, we need to thank the staff of the council and all of the teams in the voluntary and community sector for their hard work in keeping services going. And I'd also like to place on record thanks to the trade unions for the support that they gave to officers to work through what were difficult approaches to work over the course of the year. Lord Mayor, we've seen tonight the value of our investment in digital over recent years. I know we were very quickly moved on to working virtually.
Councillor Cott first.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I wanted to ask you a question, Councillor McCarthy, in relation to the voluntary sector, part of which was actually answered in your budget speech. So I'll just ask the other one. You may recall when we had a discussion at Cabinet when the Newcastle Fund was last discussed. One of my suggestions was that maybe some kind of small fund could be set up within this fund to help with small projects, creative projects, yeah, almost small businesses, I suppose you might say. And you said you would go away and have a look at that. And I'm just wondering whether there's any further work that's been done on that, and whether you could give any update. Thank you very much.
Do you want to answer that now, Councillor McCarthy, or take them all?
I'm in your hands, Lord Mayor. I can give a very quick answer to that, actually, if it's helpful. Thank you, Councillor Cott. I'm actually having a discussion because clearly we can't implement on last year's Newcastle Fund because that's already been agreed. I'm having a discussion next week about what we do for the report that will come to Cabinet very soon. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can Councillor McCarthy tell us more about the impact of the North of Tyne Digital Inclusion Plan and the work that's being done on developing digital skills and confidence in the voluntary and community sector, please?
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Byrne. Yes, we've done quite a bit of work on digital inclusion through North of Tyne, which has obviously benefited not just children in schools, but also those who benefit from adult learning opportunities too. So we've tried to provide devices, not just for children, but for adults too, through that investment. So obviously it was a significant sum of money, £600,000 across the 3 local authorities, but that is having a real impact, giving devices and access to the internet to children and families. And in terms of the voluntary and community sector and digital support, we've tried to encourage, because so much has moved online and where digital access to support is required, we have tried to make sure that the Connected Voice have been supported in offering training, and I know that they have offered specific training across the sector to make sure that others can access skills and the equipment that they need. It's really sad that lots of those local community buildings have been closed for so much of the year, and we know that that has created a problem for many citizens across our city. Thank you for the question, Jane, and I hope that's adequate answer. Thank you. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for your report. 3 topics there in that perhaps you could say some more. The efforts to get computers for kids for schoolwork is praiseworthy and might also be a route to less digital exclusion if the school children can use them to gain access for their parents to the wide world. But the fact this is necessary shows that we as a council can't rely on the internet alone to communicate with people. What more can be done to reach the hard to reach? And can I commend to colleagues an initiative by Councillor Morrissey to get laptops donated by residents, which can be passed on to schools for rebooting and reuse rather than scrapping. The report touched on scaled down ceremonies for VE Day, VJ Day and Remembrance Sunday. And while Remembrance Sunday will return, it's a great pity that the 2 milestones for peace have been missed. As well as support for veterans who need it, recognition of their service and sacrifice is needed too. Are there any plans for an additional permanent memorial to make up for what we've been forced to downplay last year? And finally, the report touches on international connections, now more important than ever, as we've severed ties with much of Europe. Can you tell us, in reply or separately in writing, what we are planning to do to sustain relationships with our other twin cities in Europe, in addition to the letter from Nancy referred to earlier in the meeting, and supporting Newcastles of the world?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Ashby. It's not just colleagues across the council who've been offering support for computers for kids. I know of schemes right across the city that are doing that. And indeed, we've secured funding from businesses and from elsewhere to support that initiative. It is really, really important that devices and access to the internet are available. It's been a huge problem, I think, for the whole of the last year, and it will have contributed to the gap in learning opportunities for children across this city. So, you know, I praise anyone who's been involved in those schemes. I know a number of businesses have been, and I know of individuals in my party and elsewhere in the community who've done exactly the same thing. So welcome initiatives like that. We have had to move to online events. I'm not sure which 2 events you're referring to, Councillor Ashby. The permanent memorial that we will think about is all of the lives that have been lost through this pandemic. To be honest, I think that will be a focus for us. We realise that we've not had the same celebrations, commemorative events over the course of the year. It's been brilliant that we've been able to mark a whole number of events by doing things virtually, but it's not the same as being together, and we clearly want to get back to doing that as quickly as possible. In relation to international connections, we do quite a lot of that work through International Newcastle. We're currently doing a Get Connected event. We launched the City of Languages. I think I talked about that a year ago, actually, when we had the French ambassador here. Launching that with me in one of our local schools. We've done a huge amount of work, given the difficulties of trying to do this through a pandemic, but we've done a huge amount of work with colleagues in Nancy and in Gelsenkirchen. So we continue to build those relationships. And of course, our ex-colleague, Councillor David Faulkner, who was a council leader here briefly, is also involved, of course, in International Newcastle, and he promotes the Newcastles of the world there. Many of us will receive regular information about that. We continue to be an outward-looking city. We know that we are as European as others, and we will continue to work on that. I think the whole Brexit decisions have been unfortunate, but we've got to work with what we can. We will continue to develop those really strong relationships with our colleagues across the world, actually, not just in Europe. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm asking this question in Councillor McCarthy's capacity as the Council's representative on the Joint Transport Committee. I did allude to it at Transport Forum last week, and you said we'd come back to it another time, so I'm going to keep on coming back to it, I'm afraid. The situation with regard to Nexus's budget is quite grim in terms of both a current outstanding deficit for the next couple of years, but also made worse by obviously the pandemic situation. Can she comment on whether she has confidence that we can avoid cuts to public transport services in the next year or two as a result of this funding situation?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As I've already said to Councillor Stone, Lord Mayor, it's very difficult to be reassuring in relation to that. We, of course, will do everything that we possibly can to protect services, but we all know that the grant that we give to Nexus that has been used to prop up bus services across the city means that we've used that money not to support concessionary travel across Tyne and Wear, but we've used that to prop up bus services for key workers, which I think was the right decision, but that is using public money to provide public transport across our region. In relation to the current deficit, Nexus are generally really good at managing budgets. They project how we need to use reserves, and then over the last 2 or 3 years, we've not actually needed to use those reserves because they've found other ways of making up any deficit, or whether that's an increase in the income we get from the metro. And of course, we're in a pandemic where many of those public transport services are running at 1/3 of their capacity. So we are currently reliant on government grant to prop up both our local bus services and the local metro. We will continue to lobby for that. I'm hoping I could give that kind of reassurance, Lord Mayor, but as you know, I'm always honest and I will not make a commitment that I might not be able to deliver. We may well have to cross that very, very difficult road in the future to look at what services are available. I'm hoping we don't have to, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Avery. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me okay, Lord Mayor?
Yes.
Right. So it just to talk about and it's an excellent report, characteristically well detailed. To talk about the section of the report dealing with homelessness in particular, I'm really delighted to see that we're building on the real success that we were able to achieve in what was really sort of a large-scale trial of the housing first approach. That is, for those who don't know, the idea that in homelessness, the best approach is to give people housing first, and that they can then deal with things like addiction problems once they have housing, rather than that being a barrier before they can access housing. That in some ways, everybody in was a large-scale trial of housing first. And we're now moving forwards with a more long-term trial of housing first. And if you could just say a little bit more about our general approach to homelessness, and in particular, the housing first approach, what benefits we think we got from it during COVID, and why we're going forward with it on a wider scale. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Avery, for that very helpful question. Yes, indeed, I think the work that we achieve in this city is amazing. It's fantastic. Of course, we still do have, we've not solved it. We still do have people who sleep rough on our streets, and generally we know who they are and we offer them support. Not everyone will accept that support, of course. And I think the everyone in, so we've learned quite a lot really through the pandemic in relation to homelessness. And I think that, Lord Mayor, that's the point that Oscar is making in this. What we did was make sure everyone had not just a bed and a roof, but proper support. And I think we can only do that really because of our our ownership of 26,000 council homes and our really close working with Your Homes Newcastle. And I think the opportunities that brings for us are helped really, and the people who need that help can therefore access that support. But it does. I'm looking forward to the work that Councillor Kilgour has talked about around collaborative Newcastle, because I think that allows us the opportunity to work much more closely with our health colleagues. As Councillor Avery said, Lord Mayor, often it's not just a roof or a bed that someone needs. It's actually much more mental health support, addiction support, and so it's much wider than that. But of course, we also make sure that people get the benefits to which they're entitled and the right level of support in order to be able to live independent lives. And I think that would be a hope for us all, that we can support people into independence in the future. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Well, colleagues, the guillotine has now fallen, so I'll allow one more question, and that would be the person who put his hand up first, which was Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you for the report, Joyce, which was thorough and comprehensive, and you probably won't have time to answer this question. Clearly, part of the report devotes to sort of attempts to mitigate inequality and poverty in the city. I'm just wondering, and you're probably not going to be able to do it now, but if you could indicate or maybe send an email to members as to how much in terms of unclaimed benefits, ranging from pension credit, PIP, ESA and universal credit, has been claimed thanks to the work of the Welfare Rights Service during this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I can give a quick response about the last few months, Lord Mayor, if I can, and then maybe offer something more fully if that would help Councillor Lambert and colleagues across the council. I know that since last April we've supported about 38. We've supported thousands of people to claim over 20 million in benefits. I think the figures are actually in the motion that's before us tonight. The specific figures are in the motion that's there. So normally our welfare rights team and our range of partners across the city bring in about 30 million additional resources into residents' hands. And I think that's a really, really important part of the work that we do and that we facilitate. And our active inclusion team, who work, obviously the active inclusion team primarily are council based, but they work with a whole range of partners across the voluntary and community sector, and all of the data is collected from all of those partners. So the 30 million roughly that we bring in each year helps to that. Of course, when we know that we've lost over 100 million in benefits into the hands of those who are claiming those benefits, it's quite challenging because we can't make up for that gap. And I'm really disappointed, as many colleagues will be, that the Chancellor has increased the £20, has retained the £20 a week, but only for the next 6 months. I'm really worried there's another cliff edge that we have to prepare for. Lord Mayor, I know there will be other colleagues. If there are any other questions that anyone wants to ask of me, given the short time we've had this evening, I'm very happy for anyone to email me. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Does Council agree to receive the report?
Agreed.
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 Thank you, colleagues. Report received. There are no appointments to be made this evening, item 11. So moving on to item 12, the motion on right to food. Can I ask Councillor Schofield if she wishes to defer the matter until the next meeting, whenever that will be, or deal with it now without any debate?
Well, obviously, I'm very disappointed about not having debate, but it has been a very good one tonight in terms of the budget. So I would like to take the vote tonight. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Is the motion seconded?
I second that, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Huddart, you have the right to reply. No, you haven't. So we now move to vote number 10, if I haven't lost count.
I was going to say reply to what, Lord Mayor?
No, you were going to speak to the motion.
Can't we just agree the motion, Lord Mayor?
Yeah.
The motion.
Agreed.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
So the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Well, that closes the meeting. It was the last meeting of the civic year. So thank you all for a reasonable standard with me throughout the year, putting up with me, making life generally easy for me, also making the virtual. Members will be retiring down at the election day, and as always, some of them lost to the vagaries of politics. So thank you all for your service this year. The next meeting, which I think will have to be held still virtually, is the annual meeting on the 26th of May at 2 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you.